I stood silent at my husband's wedding to the governor's daughter, clutching the divorce papers he shoved at me in front of 200 guests. What none of them knew, beneath my bargain dress, I held the keys to a secret $7 billion fund and the deed to the building where they were about to toast. 3 hours later, as the cake was cut, one tap exposed my name on every asset they owned. They screamed for mercy. I poured tea and smiled. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Hit subscribe now and brace yourself for the next chilling chapter. Before everything collapsed, I believed that silence was how you preserved happiness. Chandeliers hissed softly overhead, their crystal tongues scattering golden freckles across linen and bone-white china. I sat at the northern tip of the ballroom's longest banquet table, an afterthought tacked to grandeur, watching silverware glint like tiny satellites in a private galaxy money built. The room smelled of lemon polish and old power. Laughter rose and fell in polite, well-rehearsed crescendos, yet not a single ripple reached my end. I kept my back straight, my palms folded in my lap, pretending the garnet silk of my dress belonged here. It didn't. Even the chair beneath me seemed unsure, wobbling with every breath, as if ready to discard me the way the family now hosting this celebration already had. Julian's mother floated somewhere halfway down the table, diamond earrings winking each time she tilted her head toward whichever senator or CEO she currently curated. She had once introduced me as the teacher my son married during his philanthropic phase, as though love were a tax-deductible experiment. Tonight the phrase never surfaced aloud, but it quivered beneath every glance that refused to settle on me. On the opposite side, Governor Halstead's daughter Serafina, all champagne silk and inherited certainty, held court with effortless grace, nodding at compliments for a ring the size of a newborn's fist. The ring caught the chandelier's blaze and threw it back at me like a dare measure your worth in carats or step aside. 8 years ago, Julian had sworn the world went quiet whenever I read poetry to him. Tonight, he hadn't heard a single syllable of my silence. He sat 3 seats from the governor posture, immaculate hands threaded together on the starched tablecloth like a man posing for a magazine that would caption him visionary. When his gaze landed on me, it didn't pause, didn't even apologize for skimming past. It treated me as negative space, the shadow necessary to give his new light dimension. Somehow that hurt more than open disdain. Shadows, after all, once belonged to the objects that cast them. A butler refilled flutes of rosé, bypassing the single water glass orphaned in front of me. The omission was deliberate in its subtlety, a social paper cut nobody would admit bleeding from. I inhaled slowly, tasting the citrus sting of good wine I wouldn't be offered, and reminded myself to keep my shoulders relaxed. Somewhere in the distance, a string quartet coaxed Vivaldi from hidden speakers. The music should have been soothing. Instead, it mapped every second of my displacement 4 minor chords at a time. Still, I told myself, you will not break their rhythm by begging to be heard. Serafina leaned toward Julian's mother, whispering something that unfurled a ripple of genteel laughter. The sound skimmed over polished silver and landed on my skin like frost. In the reflection of the ice sculpture, 2 doves sculpted into matrimonial surrender, I caught my own face, composed, unreadable, almost bored. That mask had taken years of rehearsals, late-night crying in classroom supply closets, early morning smoothing concealer over eyes that graded essays until dawn. Tonight, the mask earned its keep. I adjusted the thin wedding band, still circling my finger symbol of vows someone else had already replaced, and wondered if it too looked bored. I thought of my grandmother then, a woman who wrote entire worlds from a cottage no one visited, who taught me that silence is simply dialogue that hasn't found its voice yet. She would have told me to listen closely tonight to let every snub become a sentence in the chapter I'd write next. So I listened to the clink of a dessert spoon being reset because Serafina didn't like its angle, to the governor boasting about upcoming tax breaks, to Julian clearing his throat in the practiced cadence of someone about to perform an ending. Glass chimed 3 times, delicate, commanding. Heads pivoted toward the center of the table where Julian now stood. Tuxedo jacket gleaming midnight blue cufflinks, reflecting applause that had not yet begun. The quartet fell into reverent hush. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Julian smiled the kind of curated half-smile that photographs well beside wealthy men's daughters. "Thank you all for sharing this pivotal night," he began, voice smooth as the bourbon he once said tasted like destiny. I watched his throat move, counting the lies, writing each vowel, and braced for the one meant for me. "A journey ends only so another may truly begin," he continued, turning to clasp Serafina's manicured hand. Applause fluttered, polite and premature. "Tonight, I celebrate love restored to its rightful course. Restored, as though our marriage had been a clerical error now corrected." A muffled, dry cough escaped someone near the press table. Cameras clicked like distant rain. Julian gestured toward a bespectacled lawyer waiting behind my chair. The man stepped forward, producing a cream envelope embossed with gold initials. Gasps pinged across the linen battlefield as the envelope was placed before me, a blank card atop reading with understanding. In that second, the ballroom dilated, sound folding inward until the only noise was my pulse rattling against bone. My fingertips brushed vellum so smooth it mocked the calluses chalk left on them every semester. "Divorced," the word whispered from inside the envelope, though I hadn't opened it yet. It smelled of headed paper and predetermined futures. I lifted my eyes to Julian. For a moment, I searched his face for something, remorse, reluctance, memory, but found only relief, the lazy gratitude of a man who had set down an inconvenient suitcase. The spotlight favored him. It always did. I stood chair legs scuffing marble loud enough to disturb the hush, but I didn't flinch. The envelope remained between us like a live wire. "Julian," I said, my voice clear, steady, audible to everyone, yet meant for him alone. "Thank you for the clarity." A reporter's pen scraped paper, capturing the line as if it were scandal. Julian nodded, misreading composure as consent. He raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he decreed. Glasses rose in obedient echo. I did not raise mine. Instead, I lifted the envelope, slid it into my clutch, and reclaimed silence, the only territory still unquestionably mine. A murmur of discomfort rippled, soon papered over by champagne and curated string arrangements. Guests resumed their conversations with the frantic civility of people who fear awkwardness more than injustice. As I lowered myself back onto the unsteady chair, the floor felt different, as if the building had rotated one imperceptible degree and only I had noticed. Julian turned his back, presenting Serafina to a photographer, their silhouettes merging into a single ornamental future. The image would make headlines by morning heir to Halstead legacy seals fortune with high society match. My absence from the caption would be proof that history edits the still breathing. I exhaled through my nose the way students do before reciting a poem they fear will quiver. The quartet shifted into the second movement of their concerto, sadder, slower, sympathetic. I imagined the composer had once loved someone beneath his station too. My thumb traced the seam of the envelope, committing its weight to muscle memory. This was the moment I realized people expected me to shatter tears, collapsed shoulders, a messy exit to justify their disdain. Instead, I reached for the only glass within my authority, water, raised it an inch toward no one, and drank the whole thing. The water tasted metallic, almost electric, as though the universe had dissolved a key inside it. I felt the liquid travel down, cooling something scorched. Across the table, Julian's sister watched me with the curiosity one reserves for wildlife appearing where it shouldn't. She leaned to Serafina, whispering behind a manicured hand. They giggled, relieved perhaps that my composure meant no scene to stain their celebration. Let them be relieved, I thought. Relief makes people careless. I folded my napkin carefully, aligning its edges until they were perfect enough to slice through memory. 7 minutes. That's how long it took to erase a marriage in public. I glanced at the antique clock mounted above the band, its minute hand nudged toward the Roman numeral 2, indifferent to the private apocalypse it had witnessed. I slipped the napkin onto the plate untouched by silverware, slid my chair back, and stood with the slow, deliberate grace of a teacher dismissing a class that wasn't listening. No one tried to stop me. My footsteps were soft, yet each one sounded like a gavel inside my chest. Lesson 1. Silence is never consent. It's strategy. As I walked toward the double doors at the far end of the hall, brocade curtains brushed my shoulders like muted applause. I noticed details I had missed upon arrival, the family crest etched into wall sconces, roses arranged in patterns that spelled initialed promises. The discreet security guard whose eyes followed me not out of duty, but disbelief that the rejected wife dared exit before dessert. Outside the ballroom, a marble corridor stretched toward an arched vestibule flooded with amber light. My heel clicks echoed a metronome, counting down the last seconds of the life they'd authored for me. I paused beneath a portrait of Julian's great-grandfather, steel tycoon and union breaker, his oil-painted gaze insisting history bends to wealth. I studied that face, then the ring on my hand, and understood that both were artifacts valued perhaps, but no longer vital. I drew the ring off slowly, feeling the dent it left in my skin, a tiny hollow where belief once lived, and dropped it into the satin pocket of my clutch beside the envelope. One broken circle joining another. I followed the scent toward the exit, turning once to glimpse the ballroom through its glass doors. Julian was laughing at something Serafina said. Champagne foam kissing his lip the way my name no longer would. I realized then that no one inside remembered what time it was when the first word of my goodbye began. But I did. 6 minutes, 43 seconds. Not even 7. A lifetime can unravel in less than the length of a pop song. Rebuilding, however, would require a symphony. The wrought iron gates sighed behind me as the rideshare rolled away, and for the first time in hours, the night sounded honest. Cicadas whirred among cypress trees, unafraid to be loud, while the Halstead estate shrank into a glittering lie on the hill. I stood in the road's shoulder dust, wedding heels sinking, clutching the satin purse that hid both a divorce decree and the ring it made irrelevant. When headlights vanished, darkness settled, but it felt less cruel than the chandelier glare I'd just fled. I inhaled hard-tasting tar and pine, everyday things money can't perfume, and let the chill remind my skin it still belonged to me. Then I walked downhill toward the city lights, each step a syllable in a sentence nobody else would edit again. A yellow cab finally rattled past, and I lifted my hand. The driver, an older man draped in dashboard rosaries, gave me a kind glance in the rear view. "Long party?" he asked, voice wrapped in accent and empathy. I considered the simplest truth. "Funeral for an illusion," I said. He nodded like he'd ferried grief before. The rest of the ride we shared, silence thick enough to knot. City towers emerged, their windows blinking electric Morse, and I saw my reflection in the glass lipstick smudged at one corner hair, loosening from an updo calibrated for other people's cameras. Julian would hate that imperfection. The thought tasted sweet. The cab stopped outside my old apartment building, a pre-war brick sentinel that smelled of rain and radiator dust. I tipped more than I could spare. Freedom deserved witnesses. In the foyer, mailboxes sagged under grocery flyers and overdue dreams. Elevator out as usual, so I climbed 4 flights, each landing echoing with college memories. Late-night pizza, borrowed textbooks, laughter carried upstairs by hope. Back then, Julian and I had danced these steps 2 at a time, believing momentum was destiny. Tonight, the stairwell bulb flickered like it might confess every secret it had heard. I let it. Secrets are lighter once they speak. Inside 4B, the air was stale with abandonment, but welcoming in its humility. Bare floorboards creaked a greeting no marble hallway ever managed. I flicked the switch. One dim lamp revealed stacks of student essays, thrift store furniture, and the desk my grandmother shipped across an ocean the summer she learned English just to write me letters. I slipped off the heels, feeling the ache climb back into my calves, and set the clutch on the counter. The envelope inside pulsed like a second heartbeat. Not yet. First, I needed to ground myself in things Julian's world could never monetize: kettle whistles, the smell of sandalwood soap, the scrape of a chair leg against honest wood. I filled the tarnished kettle and set it on the stove, then knelt beside the antique writing desk. The underside held a recessed latch. Grandma's idea of a magic trick. I pressed it. A shallow drawer slid out, revealing the compact fireproof safe she'd given me at 21. Julian had laughed, called it theatrical. I called it faith preserved in steel. The code was her birth year, stitched to the month she sold her first short story, 1932-11. When I turned the dial, the lock disengaged with a forgiving click that felt like her voice saying, "About time, Chow." I lifted the lid. Inside, lesson plans bound with twine, a flash drive labeled Athena, 2 passports, and a single maroon folder, thick with possibility. The folder's cover bore 3 scripted Vietnamese words, Di Chuk Hai, the second will. My pulse sprinted. I brushed dust from its edge the way a curator handles parchment that outlives empires. But memory ambushed before I could open it, dragging me 8 years backward to orientation week, courtyard sunlight, Julian's crooked grin as he chased a wind-blown syllabus. He'd offered me coffee he couldn't afford, and recited Auden with accidental tenderness. We spent that semester building castles of paperback poetry and ramen noodles. I believed every turret. Nostalgia is a blade sharpened by contrast, and mine cut 2 ways. There was also the January night we promised forever on a rooftop strung with pilfered Christmas lights. We were breath frosting in the air, debt heavy in our pockets, yet he knelt amid wobbly patio chairs, ring modest but brave, and said we'd co-author destiny. I accepted dizzy on cold air and thrift store Prosecco, too young to notice the disclaimer that glinted somewhere behind his eyes. We toasted plastic flutes, inventing vows no lawyer would recognize. For a breath I mourned that innocence, but the kettle shrieked its punctuation, and present tense reclaimed me. I poured water over oolong leaves, steam clouding the overhead bulb, and carried the mug back to the desk. Hands steady now, I unfastened the maroon folder. First page, a notarized document stamped by the People's Committee of Ho Chi Minh City, dated 6 months before Grandma's stroke. English and Vietnamese columns mirrored each clause upon evidence of betrayal within Celeste Duong's marriage, all literary rights, investment portfolios, and global real estate holdings belonging to Leon Duong shall transfer irrevocably to her granddaughter. Witness signatures gleamed like small lanterns. Grandma had anticipated this night with surgical foresight. She had trusted pain would eventually deliver me home. Page after page listed assets I'd never heard of: condominiums in Toronto, a minority stake in Quill Point Publishing, dividends from a Scandinavian renewable energy firm, and unbelievably an option on the vacant Victoria Avenue school I passed daily on my commute. Julian once mocked that crumbling building, calling it a canvas for vandals. Grandma saw a classroom waiting to be reborn. At the back of the folder, a handwritten inventory mapped how each resource might one day empower the unheard voices, especially girls. Her handwriting wobbled yet fierce, like a candle in wind refusing to snuff. Tears threatened. I let one fall, baptism not weakness. Under the inventory lay a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For the moment, your silence ends." I broke the wax. Inside a letter in her lilting English, "My clever Celeste, the world will try to measure you with rulers that crumble in rain. When they leave you outside, build the house yourself. Here are the keys. Love loudly, even if whispering looks safer." My grandmother, the reclusive bestseller nobody recognized in grocery lines, had orchestrated a posthumous rescue mission. I pressed the page to my lips, inhaling phantom jasmine perfume. Resolve slid under my skin like fresh ink. I set the folder aside and plugged the Athena drive into my laptop. A password field bloomed. On instinct, I typed the first line Grandma ever recited to me. "We are what we carry." The desktop unlocked like a vault of tomorrows. Blueprints expanded across the screen, renovation plans for the Victoria Avenue School augmented reality lecture pods, budgets, cross-referenced with silent investors, timelines aggressive enough to make boardrooms sweat. Another directory held dossiers on 47 emerging writers, orphans of the publishing gatekeepers, complete with sample chapters, agent rejection slips, and Grandma's meticulous margin notes. Protect her metaphor, sharpen his cadence, guard their flame. She had scouted an army of voices while the aristocracy feigned benevolence. Hope, it seemed, was a clandestine business. A tremor of exhilaration rippled through me, followed by a pang grief for every hour I'd spent sanding my edges to fit Julian's crystal palace. How many student poems had I declined to share, afraid sophisticated ears would titter? How many Friday night readings had I skipped to iron his cuffed shirts? Guilt tried to surface, but resolve was heavier. I drained the mug and set it down palm flat on wood-grounding lightning. Beyond the glass, Los Angeles blinked like a restless manuscript. Billboards touted miracles for a price, sirens stitched new narratives in the distance, and I felt the city nod, recognizing a fellow insomniac story. Billboards sang soft lies about fame. but I could read the erased footnotes. Every neon promise demanded collateral in secrets. Tonight I owed no secrets to anyone. I rose, unzipped a duffel from the closet floor, canvas, frayed zipper, temperamental perfect, and began packing. Not clothes first, symbols. The chalk-dusted sneakers I wore when coaching the freshman slam team, smelling faintly of gym varnish and adolescent courage. The fountain pen Grandma gifted me the day I signed my first adjunct contract, still half-filled with sepia ink. A dog-eared anthology of immigrant poets whose margins bore Julian's early pencil admiration before ambitions starved his wonder. Into a side pocket, I slid the maroon folder and the ring, forcing past and future to ride side-by-side hostages to each other. Only then did I add jeans, textbooks, 2 blouses, and a sweater that smelled of library stacks enough to suggest a weekend, not an exodus. Before closing the bag, I caught sight of the divorce envelope on the counter. I walked over, tore it in half, then quartered until golden initials littered the trash can like confetti from a failed parade. The copy would reach me by certified mail. Symbolism didn't need duplicates. Clock hands crawled toward 9:00 p.m. Funny at the estate dessert would be served violins slipping into Gershwin, while servers presented macarons the color of entitlement. Julian might be wondering why the media coordinator hadn't found me for photos. Perhaps he assumed I was powdering my insignificance in a washroom. He would learn soon enough that some absences are detonations. Bag packed safe returned to its pocket. I switched off lights until only the desk lamp remained, spotlighting the Athena drive gleaming like a tooth in the dark. I pocketed it, whispered thanks to the silence, and stepped into the hall. Mrs. Hernandez's door cracked open. She raised an eyebrow. "Back from the ball," she teased. "Heading to write a new one," I said. Her chuckle followed me as I locked 4B, slipped the key through the mail slot, and descended stairs, now echoing promise. Outside, the same cab waited. The driver must have sensed chapters left unwritten. I slid into the seat. Where to now? I pictured the derelict school on Victoria Avenue. Somewhere worth rewriting. The meter clicked chronology's drumroll. 9:12 p.m. The cab's taillights shrank behind a curtain of drizzle as I stepped onto the cracked curb outside an all-night copy shop, the only place in Koreatown still bright enough, anonymous enough to stage a resurrection at 9:14 p.m. Neon kanji flickered above the window, painting my damp hair electric pink, while I unfolded the maroon folder onto a scarred laminate counter. The clerk, half asleep behind a pile of flyers, didn't glance up. The universe was gifting me privacy in plain sight. I braced both forearms on the countertop, whispered my grandmother's birth year to steady my lungs, and read the first line aloud just once. In the event Celeste Le Duong is betrayed by spouse or in-laws, all assets shall be released immediately and irrevocably. The sentence felt less like a legal trigger and more like a detonator hidden in lace, every clause wired to history. My pulse matched the rain pelting the glass. Betrayal, it seemed, carried its own metronome. I sifted through annexes dense with small-cap investments and minority stakes, a biotech startup in Copenhagen, silent shares in a Vietnamese publishing house I'd idolized at 16 rental property by the Toronto waterfront. But one line glowed hotter than the rest: beneficiary account, Halcyon Trust Switzerland authorization upon biometric confirmation. That trust had been a myth in family rumor, a fairy tale about royalties Grandma earned but never spent. Now it sat in sans serif reality, waiting for my fingerprints. 4 digits followed an encrypted Swiss routing code that looked like a secret handshake between old money and new purpose. I opened my laptop, the Athena drive already pulsing in the USB port like a tiny lighthouse, and launched the secure link Grandma's letter had instructed me to use. On the modal login window, a single oval blinked voice identification. My reflection in the webcam hovered pale determined. I cleared my throat and recited the passphrase she'd chosen from her first novel, Stories Are Bridges Built from Wounds. The screen resolved into a holdings dashboard that made my adjunct professor salary look like lunch money. I expected euphoria. Instead, a strange quiet settled the hush that drapes snowfields before dawn. Numbers marched across rows 8 digits 9, followed by the currency abbreviation CHF. Enough to buy several city blocks, enough to buy silence or megaphones depending on the soul holding the checkbook. I hovered over transfer funds and pictured Julian's smirk when he told me a teacher's pension was cute. My finger clicked confirm with the calm of an executioner who has memorized the mercy afterward. In less than a minute, 42 million francs streamed into an escrow account under Orpheus Development LLC, a shell company Grandma had pre-registered in my name 7 years ago, anticipating tonight like a chess player who could taste checkmate from move 3. I changed the password, salted the trail with VPN dust, and logged out. Behind me, the copy shop printer whirred to life, spitting a notarized proof of transfer into the tray. The clerk slid the page toward me without comment. Transactions like confessions thrive where strangers refuse eye contact. Rain slowed to a mist when I exited night air riddled with the hiss of distant buses. I called Naomi Odell, structural engineer, ex-slam poet, and the only person who'd ever believed my metaphor about steel skeletons having memory. 1 ring, then her gravelly voice. "You good? I'm solvent," I answered. "Meet me at Victoria Avenue School South Gate, 30 minutes. She whistled low. The haunted brick pile. I thought Julian said that place was condemned I finished, and tonight, condemned's about to change its meaning. Naomi cackled an ironworker's laugh. "Bring coffee," I added. "Black. We're going to wake ghosts." 25 minutes later, my ride idled before a weather-beaten chain-link fence. The old public school loomed beyond windows-boarded roof sagging like a tired spine. The streetlight overhead flickered, illuminating graffiti that read, "Knowledge is a loaded gun." Grandma had taught here briefly during her American years, smuggling immigrant kids Shakespeare lines between ESL drills. Julian once called the building an eyesore ripe for bulldozers. I called it a chrysalis that never got spring. Naomi's pickup rumbled up headlights slicing rain fog. She hopped out in steel-toe boots brandishing 2 coffees. "If I step on a rusty nail, it's your fault," she said, shoving a cup into my hand. I passed her the printed deed transfer I'd forged through Orpheus minutes earlier. "Not my building anymore," she noted, scanning the paper. "It's yours." Lightning flared silent but declarative. We climbed through a gap in the fence, shoes crunching wet glass. Inside corridors smelled of chalk dust mildew and childhood fears. Lockers tilted off hinges like tombstones. The gym bleachers moaned in wind as if cheering for ghosts. Yet under the decay, I felt a hum the same low vibration as stage boards before curtains lift. Naomi tapped a load-bearing column with her flashlight, listening for hollow thuds. "Foundation's better than it looks," she said. "They don't build ceilings like this now, Douglas fir 6x12s. Earthquakes haven't murdered it yet." I imagined toddlers reciting alphabets beneath those beams long before I was born, and the symmetry thrilled me. We'd teach again here, but syllables would travel through fiber optics holograms, maybe even wildflower gardens on the roof. We reached the auditorium, peeling velvet seats, spotlight housings rusted like sea wrecks. I climbed the stage toes, sinking into warped pine, and faced the emptiness, the way a conductor greets an orchestra not yet seated. "Project Athena," I announced to that vacuum, letting the title ricochet off ceiling arches. Naomi raised one brow. "Sounds mythic." "It has to be," I said. "Women the world tried to silence deserve a goddess on the masthead." She cracked her knuckles. "You got architects in mind?" "Not architects co-authors," I answered. 47 of them, ages 15 to 27, writers who can't afford agent fees or nepotism. I explained Grandma's scouting the rejection slips, the micro-grants earmarked in the trust. Naomi listened, the engineer's skepticism melting into the poet's grin she rarely let boardrooms witness. While she measured beam dimensions, I spread blueprints across the stage floor, reading pods shaped like cocoon chairs, an AI translation lab that would convert manuscripts to multiple languages in real time, studios where survivors of domestic silence could record audiobooks without shame. The cost estimates were brutal, but the trust balance was kinder. I traced the blueprint's main hallway with my finger, labeling it "Lie Corridor," after Grandma's pen name. At the far end, the design called for a glass atrium, symbolic lungs for the building. Under Julian's reign, I'd suffocated. Here, air would be free and unavoidable. My phone buzzed, an encrypted notification from Halcyon transfer completed. Balance remaining, 700,000 CHF. Enough runway. I forwarded the confirmation to Attorney Ramsey, the bulldog Grandma hired before her final hospital stay. He replied within seconds, purchase contracts en route to escrow. Counteroffers expected by dawn. My fangs are sharpened. His professionalism tasted like vengeance done legally. I thumbed a second message to Amico graphics prodigy and former student now designing video game worlds. Need branding kit for Athena in 48 HR's colors, logo motion intro, budget sky. She simply sent back a lightning emoji. Somewhere in Tokyo, her keyboard began forging typefaces that would outlive us both. Naomi returned, cheeks flushed, rain glistening on her buzz cut. "Good bones. We'll need seismic retrofits, but the city offers grants if we claim educational redevelopment." I laughed. "We're not claiming, we're proclaiming." She shook her head affectionately. "You talk like you swallowed a manifesto." My smile faltered a moment. Maybe I did. Maybe that's the only meal betrayal leaves you. She clapped my shoulder, a gesture heavy as brotherhood. "All right then, manifesto. Let's get you power." Back in the lobby, I snapped photos of fractured tile mosaics, hands forming sign language letters from a 1970s art class. In Athena, they'd stay restored, a reminder that communication grows from broken things. Outside, dawn teased pink through cloud seams. We locked the fence behind us, sealing potential inside rusted links. I told Naomi to draft preliminary reinforcement plans by Monday. She told me to get some sleep. "Tomorrow I meet the bank president," I said. "Sleep is a rumor." We parted at the curb where my second ride waited, this time a hybrid sedan, professional windows, tinted like secrets politely kept. During the drive, I composed an opening email to the 47 writers on Grandma's list. Subject line: Your silence ends here. Body: A new institute is forming to amplify the stories gatekeepers feared. Tuition 0. Compensation revenue share on every word. Launch orientation in 6 weeks. Reply ready within 72 hours to claim your seat. I hovered, then hit send to a BCC roster sprawled across continents. Seconds later, replies pinged. Ready. God, yes, ready. Some included crying emojis, others entire paragraphs of disbelief. I scrolled until tears blurred the screen. The world had been thirstier than I knew. We reached my temporary loft downtown, a converted broom closet above a print shop, but before climbing the stairs, I opened my banking app one last time. Orpheus Development's U.S. account reflected a fresh deposit from the Swiss Conversion Bureau. I carved out $2 million, earmarked it for an Athena scholarship fund, and set a daily auto transfer of $5,000 to a micro-grant program for single mothers finishing GEDs. Each midnight money would flow like blood thinner against generational clots. Bureaucracy might snarl eventually, but tonight paperwork was a river, and I was the moon-pulling tide. Inside the loft, the air smelled of ink and sage. I flipped on a lamp shaped like an open book light spilling over exposed brick. On the corkboard above my bed, I pinned the building blueprint beside a Polaroid of Grandma holding my first chapbook. Next to it, I tacked a clipping from a glossy magazine, Julian and Serafina smiling beneath the headline, Engagement Signals Merger of Two Dynasties. I drew a thin black line through Julian's grin, not violent, just surgical, then hung the Swiss balance sheet beside it, the decimal places shining like replacement stars. Sometime after 4 a.m., Attorney Ramsey messaged escrow accepted. Seller countered at +3%. I crushed it to +1%. Closing in 48 hours. I replied with a voice memo, exhaustion cracking the edges. Thank you, Stephen. And please forward copies of the deed to City Council and the Historical Preservation Board. I want them on notice Athena will honor the past while rewriting the future. A pause, then I added. Also apply for the seismic education grant Naomi mentioned. Expedite. Ramsey wrote back one line. Consider it hammered. My limbs vibrated with caffeine and purpose too stubborn for rest. I opened a blank slide deck titled Athena Investor Overview, though I didn't need investors. Optics mattered. Slide 1. Problem gatekeepers throttle marginalized voices. Slide 2. Solution decentralized publishing pipeline leveraging AI translation and direct-to-reader microtransactions. I punctuated each bullet with photographs of the decrepit school captioned before hope. The contrast would seduce donors hungry for redemption stories at galas. Grandma had taught me even philanthropists require theater. At 5:11 a.m., the first writer zoomed from Nairobi, weeping and laughing at once. She'd sold her laptop 2 months earlier to pay rent. She called from an internet cafe. I promised Athena would cover new equipment plus a stipend, and she pressed her palm to the camera lens like a pledge. Steel splintered my chest. Gratitude can be heavier than betrayal. Sunlight crawled through the loft's dusty skylight, painting paper stacks honey gold. I brewed another pot, this time Vietnamese chicory, and traced steam trails with my finger like writing spells into air. the city below stirred delivery trucks, morning joggers' sirens. Somewhere Julian's alarm would ring inside a mansion lined with bespoke closets. He'd rise believing the previous night sealed his future. He was half right, a future had been sealed, just not the one bearing his crest. I drafted press release language next Athena Institute, a women-led sanctuary for storytelling innovation to open on the historic Victoria Avenue campus. Mission: transform trauma into testimony, vision into viable industry. I scheduled it for distribution the morning escrow closed. By then, any attempt from Julian's lawyers to sabotage the acquisition would arrive stale. Grandma's ghost sat beside me in the silence, lips pursed in amused approval. I imagined her patting my hand, reminding me that healing is the boldest revenge because it denies the wound reenactment rights. At 6:47 a.m., Naomi texted a photo sunrise bleeding over the school's rooftop, her silhouette atop a ladder holding survey gear like a warrior raising a banner. Caption: Good bones, just need muscle. I saved it as wallpaper, then finally allowed exhaustion to claim my spine. I lay on the futon, fully clothed laptop, humming a lullaby of open spreadsheets, and closed my eyes, knowing the blueprint of a revolution now lived inside escrow numbers, coded emails, and the hearts of 47 writers who refused to stay unpublished. Grandma once wrote that stories choose their architects. Tonight, architecture had chosen me. My last waking thought as the city tipped into official mourning was a single Greek word, anastasis, rising from death. When I dreamed in blueprints, corridors sprouting cherry blossoms, classrooms echoing slam poetry in 50 languages, a library whose roof opened at dusk so books could taste moonlight. In the center stood Grandma Chalk, on her palms nodding as if to say, "You were worth the inheritance all along." The clock on the nightstand flicked to 9:01 a.m., 21 hours since betrayal's announcement, 7 hours since escrow's handshake, and mere heartbeats until the world learned what a discarded teacher could build when betrayal unlocked the vault. The clock on my laptop read 21:03 when I shut the loft's blinds against the neon outside and logged into the encrypted shell company dashboard Grandma had left like a secret lever. The alias I'd chosen? Arya Chen blinked in the corner of the interface, a name with just enough syllables to feel plausible, just enough distance to keep Celeste invisible. Under that mask, the halcyon funds whispered in steady Swiss franc heartbeats, ready to become seeds. I remembered Grandma's motto, "You don't shout power, you plant it where roots can't be traced." So I began sowing. First, purchased the majority stake in ScribeForge, a fledgling AI-driven publishing tool. 2 Stanford dropouts were pitching on obscure forums. Their prototype could ingest a raw manuscript flag. Structural weak spots suggest culturally nuanced translations and auto-generate multilingual marketing blurbs. Services New York houses charged small authors in Oregon for. I wired $2.4 million before sunrise, stipulating a non-negotiable clause scribe. Forge would operate on a sliding scale license for writers earning under $30,000 a year. The founders hesitated. I sweetened the deal with lifetime health coverage and a note, "Innovation without ethics is just extraction. Choose better." They chose. By 2117, a second window opened Voxquill, a blockchain-backed ebook marketplace, struggling to survive Amazon's gravity well. I liked their creed, "Decentralize royalties. Let stories outrun monopolies." I injected capital under the same alias, insisting on end-to-end transparency dashboards so authors could watch each sale in real time, see every micropayment split between translator, cover artist, sensitivity reader. The board chair and aging editor, who'd once rejected me with a form letter, signed the term sheet without recognizing the woman on the other end of the VoIP call. Revenge tasted better when served as anonymous opportunity. With platforms secured, I pivoted to content the lifeblood every algorithm cries for. Grandma's dossier of 47 writers waited in a password-locked folder labeled BO Lie Take Forward. At 21:23, I opened the first file, Layla Brun, 20 queer Syrian-American manuscript count, 3 rejection letters, 31. Her novel, Paper Crescents, had been deemed too regionally specific by 5 U.S. houses and insufficiently authentic by one London imprint, whose staff had never set foot outside Soho. I read her opening chapter aloud to the bare brick walls, Saffron Market's code-switched jokes, a grandmother who stitched Arabic lullabies into the hems of graduation gowns, and felt the room inhale. Layla wasn't regionally specific. She was astronomically human. I drafted a contract offering a 70-30 royalty split in her favor, plus health care, and an advance her FAFSA forms would have called science fiction. One by one, dossiers glowed on my screen. Indira Malik, Mumbai's slam poet, who wrote in 2 languages because neither alone could carry her rage. Ruthie Kim, Korean adoptee from Minnesota, with a gift for horror so tender it made editors uncomfortable. Gabriela Torres, undocumented dreamer, who sold flash fiction to pay community college tuition, each PayPal receipt labeled dishwasher shift. 47 stories braided by a single constant, the gate stayed locked, not because the writing lacked brilliance, but because brilliance showed up wearing accents, scars, or poverty. I sent personalized invitations, subject line, "Your story isn't too much, it's exactly enough." The email signature bore only initials, AC Arya Chen, followed by an encrypted signal number. At 21:36, the first reply chimed, "I thought this was a prank until I read the royalty terms." 6 minutes later, another, "I don't have a lawyer. Can my aunt look this over?" "Yes," I answered. I would pay the aunt's hourly fee. By 22:00, my inbox bloomed with red receipts like wildflowers after arson. Somewhere between caffeine refills, I felt the air shift the sound of 47 doors unlocking across 5 continents. But a seed needs soil, not spotlight, so I built a firewall of anonymity. Contracts were routed through Delphi Ledger, a Hong Kong compliance firm that specialized in confidential art patronage. The authors knew me only as their editor, CD. I kept Zoom's camera-off voice filtered through AI pitch flattening that replaced my Californian lilt with neutral mid-Atlantic vowels. Risky but necessary if Julian's investigators traced wire transfers back to me before the Institute's foundation was laid, they'd deploy injunctions faster than termites through oak. By 22:22, the training servers at ScribeForge were already crunching the first manuscripts, feeding chapters into transformer models fine-tuned on inclusive datasets. I watched algorithmic notes populate margins, suggesting sharper stakes here, flagging Orientalist cliches slipped in by well-meaning translators there. Each flagged line triggered a Slack ping that reached the author's phone like a mentor who never slept. I built a separate channel called Workshop 47, invited every writer, and opened with ground rule critique, The craft guard the heart. Trolls get ejected faster than you can say gatekeeping. Heart emojis cascaded. Someone typed, "I've waited my whole life for this timeline." I almost replied, "Me too," but held back. CD couldn't sound sentimental. Around 23:05, Naomi texted structural load simulations. I skimmed them while monitoring ScribeForge servers. The beam reinforcements came in under budget. The school would withstand a magnitude 8 quake and still shelter every stanza. I forwarded her projection files to Ramsey with the note, "File for city inspection first thing. Bribes not acceptable." He replied with a gif of Ruth Bader Ginsburg flexing. I smiled long and unguarded until my cheeks remembered they could. Midnight drew a hard line, but momentum didn't care. I initiated Phase Ember, the covert marketing blitz. Step 1, register at IMCD Books across every social platform bio, reading simply, "Our stories never needed permission." Step 2, schedule a trail of cryptic micro-teasers, blurred cover art, single-line quotes, 60-second audio snippets voiced by a text-to-speech engine, pitched gender-neutral. The hashtags #written silence and #gatecrashed started trending regionally within 3 hours, helped by micro-influencers I paid in grants rather than cash. They tweeted nothing but quotations from the tracks, letting audiences mistake art for prophecy. Meanwhile, a spreadsheet of independent bookshops unfurled in another tab. Chain stores would kowtow to Julian's corporate sponsors, but indie owners survive on mutually assured subversion. I offered each of them first edition hardcovers printed on recycled pulp with QR-coded augmented reality layers. Point your phone, see watercolor animations bloom behind the text. Cost per unit, triple standard offset printing, but Athena's war chest was deep, and my cause deeper. At 01:47, I paused. A sudden hush pressed against the room like a held breath. It took a second to locate the source. The email queue had stopped dinging. 47 contracts signed, encrypted, returned. 47 voices anchored to the project. For a heartbeat, I felt weightless, a bead of mercury between altitude and gravity. Then the next phase roared editing. I toggled into ScribeForge's collaborative editing suite. Layla was already online, cursor hovering over a paragraph where her protagonist debated burning an heirloom wedding veil. "Does the imagery land?" she typed into the sidebar. I answered as CD trimming the veil description by 4 words, suggesting she let smell do the work. Burnt silk jasmine oil, a grandmother's perfume ghosting the fibers. She replied with triple exclamation points and a line of Arabic script that Google translated to, "I feel seen." This was the yield of the seed. By 02:22, the Slack channel buzzed like a beehive. Indira and Gabriella debated point-of-view shifts. Ruthie tested horror elements on an audience across 3 time zones. A Filipina poet named Isabel live-streamed her first acceptance read-through, sobbing until her screen fogged. I moderated as CD dropping craft links, tagging ScribeForge auto tutorials, occasionally sliding in a meme to keep adrenaline from calcifying into dread. None of them asked who CD was. They were too busy being louder than the rejection they'd survived. Outside downtown, sirens stitched the night, but inside the loft, the only emergency was the relentless beauty of drafts colliding. I opened the Athena launch tracker set milestone first wave upload for 6 weeks out and linked VoxQuill's deployment API. Every time a manuscript hit 90% readiness, a webhook would pre-populate a product page dynamic pricing geo-fenced DRM optional pay-what-you-can default. I inserted a line of code to send 10% of every sale to an emergency fund for authors at risk of domestic violence, a quiet salute to Grandma who once hid bruises beneath dye sleeves while teaching grammar. The night thinned toward 03:30 when the only tasks left were mechanical. I queued weekly disbursements, modest stipends funneled through prepaid debit cards so authors lacking bank accounts could still pay rent. Then I drafted NDAs for every vendor, printers, voice actors, calligraphers, and embedded a clause requiring mandatory bias training because a revolution that replicates oppression is just a remodeling. Fatigue finally slipped under my eyelids, but I fought it long enough to compose one last message in Workshop 47. Remember, brilliance isn't scarce. Spotlight is. We're building more stage, not competing for the same square foot. Reactions exploded hearts, raised hands, the crying, laughing cat I'd never understood but cherished anyway. I signed off CD out, keep the night loud. Then before logging off, I clicked Schedule Publish on the first teaser bundle, a 10-second clip of layered voices reading the same line in 7 languages, each overlay slower than the last, until the final whisper said, "We were never supposed to fit inside your margins." At 03:47, I closed the laptop. Dawn hadn't even considered stretching yet, but somewhere algorithms were already typesetting rebellion, and servers rattled with the weight of new literature. I let my head drop against the futon's thin pillow, listening to the rain taper into apology against the skylight. Behind my eyelids, 47 windows lit up across a map like constellations rearranging themselves into a story old heavens never authorized. 7 minutes passed before sleep claimed me, but in that liminal drift, I pictured Julian's future board meeting the smug stretch of his smile when he pronounced the traditional publishing landscape predictable. I wondered how that smile would twitch when his analysts reported a sudden reader exodus toward an insurgent imprint named only CD. I hoped I'd be sipping tea on a scaffold plank at Victoria Avenue Paint, still wet on a sign that read, "Athena was built from your no." By 04:00, precisely the midpoint between yesterday's betrayal and tomorrow's blueprint, the seeds were in soil money. Masked writers rallied algorithms armed, and somewhere inside the building skeleton, Naomi promised to resurrect. I swear I felt the floor pulse like a giant book about to crack open its spine and breathe. Julian Halstead's father liked to boast that the first rule of a good acquisition was timing. The second was foreknowledge, and the third, should anyone ask, was never letting the prey smell the gun oil. On the gray Monday morning of the Township Land Commission hearing, all 3 principals collapsed in his palm like a paper knife. The Halstead Group's entourage bankers, junior lawyers, a family friend from the Commerce Department filed into the marble foyer of City Hall, believing they were minutes from locking up a controlling option on Meridian Robotics, a mid-size AI logistics firm that owned 50 acres of industrial-zoned real estate along the Los Angeles River. Meridian sat on proprietary sensor patents, and the land itself bordered the proposed high-speed freight extension. Whoever held both could dictate a generation of West Coast shipping. For months, the Halsteads had massaged council members, floated campaign donations, even courted local reporters with exclusives about jobs and revitalization. All that remained was a procedural transfer of site stewardship, then Meridian's board would sign the purchase agreement, and Julian would stride into the press conference beside his fiancée, champion of regional innovation, darling of bipartisan commerce. But inside the hearing chamber, the long oak table bore an unexpected nameplate at the reserved seat. Orpheus Development Trust, Managing Director, A. Chen. Julian's father stopped mid-stride. The junior lawyer whispered, "Who the hell is Orpheus?" No one answered because no one knew, and the absence of that knowledge rang louder than the gavel calling the meeting to order. On the projection screen, the city clerk advanced a slide deck titled Transfer of Escrow Title Meridian Site Block 14. The Halstead logo was nowhere. Instead, a minimalist emblem, silver lyre strings against black, stood stark in the upper corner, accompanied by a line of dense legalese citing escrow already closed as of 07:43 that morning. Julian's phone vibrated with a flurry of encrypted pings. Analysts scrambling, deal counsel ransacking M&A databases, a cousin in Singapore forwarding whispers from the sovereign wealth community. Transfer executed yesterday outside regular market hours, counterparty unknown. He palmed the device, heat rising behind his collar. Across the horseshoe dais, council member Ortega, who'd happily accepted Halstead campaign checks, offered him an apologetic half-shrug, as though to say politics had rules even money sometimes misread. Julian's father exhaled through his nose, a noise that once sent junior VPs scurrying. Today, it merely fogged his own glasses. Then the courtroom doors opened again, and a slim woman in a charcoal pantsuit stepped inside with the quiet precision of a violin's first note, unhurried, unflinching. Her hair was coiled low, not the midnight waterfall Julian remembered, and the soft gold scar above her eyebrow was now just a delicate tilde of silver. She carried a tablet, a slim leather folio, and nothing else. No entourage, no press, no ring. The clerk nodded. "Ms. Chen, your seat is ready." She thanked him, voice steady as water poured in fog, and took the chair marked Orpheus. From 5 meters away, Julian recognized the slight tilt of her head when scanning a room, the way she tucked her thumb under her fingers while listening. The world compressed to a pulse Celeste. But the name on the placard wasn't hers. A mask, then. His lungs forgot their rhythm. The city attorney began the roll call, confirming parties present. Representing Orpheus Development Trust, Managing Director Aria Chen. Celeste raised her hand. She wore clear lens glasses he'd never seen, and the lenses caught fluorescence, masking her gaze. Julian's father motioned to the Halstead counsel, who leapt up. "Point of order, Mr. Chair. Our firm was under the understanding we remained the sole qualified transferee in this matter." The attorney clicked his pen with audible frustration. The chair read from his briefing. Escrow closed at dawn. The seller executed fiduciary duty. Any objection is outside this committee's jurisdiction. Julian's heartbeat tripped. He had spent 6 months engineering this move, selling it to his fiancé's father as a strategic synergy. Yet Celeste, if it truly was Celeste, had surfaced as a phantom buyer overnight, severing board consensus, preempting Halstead's regulatory filings so surgically that compliance flags hadn't even flickered. How? He leaned toward his family's lead banker. "Pull beneficial ownership records now. I want every Zurich custodian and Cayman minister on speed dial." The banker nodded thumbs, flying over a secure tablet. Meanwhile, Celeste, or Aria, opened her folio, unfolded a single page, and slid it to the committee clerk. Camera flashes popped from 2 local reporters in the gallery, hungry for the drama of old money left bracing against surprise. The clerk read aloud, "Orpheus Development pledges to transform Block 14 into a renewable logistics research accelerator, 300 union jobs, green tech apprenticeships, minority-owned vendor quotas, plus a 10-year community profit sharing model. Gasps rustled. The plan outshone Halstead's proposal by a solar mile. Theirs had offered a glossy fulfillment hub, brute-forcing efficiency. Hers promised future-proof solutions and equity. Julian's father stood, cheeks mottling crimson. "This is corporate theft masquerading as philanthropy." His voice rasped across walnut paneling. But Celeste didn't look up. She annotated the proposal margins as though tightening screws. Reporter lenses pivoted Halstead tirade. Celeste composure contrast too delicious. The chair tapped his gavel. "Sir, sit or be removed." A murmur of delight trickled through the audience. Powerful men being scolded in public is a daily special people never tire of ordering. Julian tugged his father's sleeve, urging restraint, calculating salvage operations. Because salvage mattered, the new Halstead Magna Media merger hinged on the robotics patents now officially beyond reach. Shareholder calls were slated for Friday. Serafina's father expected assurances on ROI. Julian imagined the headline, "Halstead Acquisition Outbid by Shadow Trust." Stock algorithms would read uncertainty as infection. Committee discussion lasted 40 minutes. Celeste answered each technical question with crisp citations referencing zoning subclauses so obscure even the city clerk squinted. She'd done homework on a timetable that should have been impossible. Julian could feel the narrative sliding. Halstead, once the inevitable titan, now the fumbling heir pitted against a calm, benevolent insurgent. At recess, he maneuvered through the corridor crowd until he intercepted her by the vending machines. "Sell Aria." The single syllable cracked like black ice. She looked up, glasses off, now bare eyes meeting his. For half a second, he saw the woman who'd graded his freshman creative writing papers with purple ink, who'd sung Bill Withers on rainy drives, who'd once traced constellations on his palm and named them after unwritten poems. Then shutters dropped. "Mr. Halstead," she acknowledged. Formal, neutral, deadly. He searched for outrage or triumph, anything to map her move. "What is this?" he whispered, mindful of ears. "Due diligence," she replied. Her attention shifted to the machine's product list as though betrayals were grocery items. "You outbid me by legal loophole." He tried to sound amused. It emerged frayed. She selected green tea, the bottle spiraling down. "Outbid," she echoed. Interesting verb for a land purchase publicly listed. She paused. "Maybe the noun you want is out-prepared." Julian's phone vibrated again. Text from counsel. "Beneficial owner of Orpheus traces to Halcyon Trust. Swiss secrecy. We're blocked. Beneath that stock dip already 4% on pre-market whisper." He swallowed. "Look." He began softer, the way one addresses a storm cloud. "You're not obligated to play cat and mouse. If this is about the settlement, we can renegotiate." Celeste's eyebrows arched, an artful accent of skepticism. "Settlements imply damage valuation." "I'm in construction, Julian, not demolition." He exhaled through his teeth. "You blindsided my family." Her gaze cooled. "Your family taught me the value of foresight." He stepped closer. "Serafina's father is expecting board approval in 48 hours. You just vaporized months of groundwork." She unscrewed the tea. Maybe build on foundations that aren't made of other people's silence. The sentence landed like salt water on raw metal corrosion, sped up, nothing left unmarked. Reporters drifted toward them, sniffing viral soundbite. Celeste pivoted, leaving Julian staring at cold vending machine glass reflecting his own unraveling. The afternoon session slammed the coffin shut. Committee voted 6-1 to grant Orpheus conditional stewardship, pending EPA review. Celeste had pre-queued with clean energy consultants. Halstead scowled as civic applause erupted. Outside, overcast skies broke into shards of California blue. Cameras thronged the steps. Celeste declined comment, citing respect for process, and vanished into an unbranded sedan. Julian's father barked orders to their driver, but even the Lincoln's doors sounded defeated. During the ride home, Julian parsed call notes analysts' downgrading outlook. Serafina texting, then, "Call me board members requesting emergency teleconferences." He noticed for the first time that the divorce envelope on his dashboard had been sliced open, then resealed by his fiancée's meticulous nails. He pictured her reading the clauses he once skimmed, realizing assets might bleed into a settlement he could no longer contain. Back at Halstead HQ, the glass facade mirrored sunset like a slow immolation. In the executive lounge, his father slammed a decanter onto the credenza. "Find out who's funding her," he growled, ignoring that nobody had confirmed the woman was Celeste. "Family hedge fund cartel? I don't care. Dig." Julian nodded hollowly, but new information warfare works both ways. Whoever bankrolled Orpheus had already hacked Halstead timetables, perhaps their attorney rosters, maybe even their household calendars. He imagined unknown eyes scrolling his private calls to Serafina, noting every timestamp. The air tasted metallic pre-storm electricity. That night alone in the penthouse, Julian paced the balcony while LA's arteries glittered below. He replayed Celeste's unhurried entrance, her unflappable diction, the scalpel-clean retort about preparation. It haunted him because it was the mirror image of an old memory sophomore year English workshop, Celeste defending his fledgling sonnet against upper-class cynics. Meaning is deliberate. Obscurity is laziness, she'd said, then steady saving him from literary evisceration. Now she'd wielded that steadiness as a weapon, and the blade left no blood, only vacancy where certainty once sat. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon, the kind he used to gift her on anniversaries, and stared at the untouched glass, realizing she'd never liked bourbon. She'd only liked the way he talked about oak barrels and Tennessee lore. All those years she'd been listening for the subtext. Now she wrote it. Across town in a refurbished studio overlooking Victoria Avenue School, Celeste powered down her tablet. Naomi's latest site survey pinged green. The first batch of ScribeForge enhanced manuscripts hit 92% readiness. She glanced at the window reflection, the city buzzing like a beehive under strobe, and allowed herself one exhale of satisfaction. Not revenge, she reminded the mirror, but resonance, letting the universe echo the pitch it had tried to mute in her throat. She sipped green tea gone lukewarm, and imagined Julian's expression when he realized today's ambush was only an overture. In Julian's penthouse, the bourbon sweated in untasted arcs. He finally threw it back, but the burn failed to cauterize the dread. Somewhere in the hollow between rib and retina, suspicion nested. If Celeste had appeared once she could appear again, boardrooms, press leaks, asset ledgers, each time wearing a name as fluid as smoke. He muttered to the dark, "What are you planning?" The city offered no answer, just sirens weaving the night. Yet if he'd listened harder, he might have caught the soft thrum of printing presses stamping a new logo onto dust jacket spines. CD. The initials flickered in his peripheral vision like a fuse he hadn't noticed burning until the corridor filled with smoke. Serafina Halstead opened the press conference the way an actress commands opening night teeth, immaculate voice, pitched to seduce every boom mic in the room, dressed the exact shade of royal blue used in campaign banners. At 35:01, she strode onto the gleaming dais erected inside their new headquarters, a 16-story glass jewel freshly renovated to hold the flagship of Halstead Magna Media. The air smelled of orchids, LED heat, and bravado. Photographers crowded the risers, streaming lights spliced through haze like paparazzi confetti. She thanked everyone for attending, then pivoted so reporters could feast on the view downtown's skyline, framed behind her in panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the same skyline she'd promised to re-energize with disruptive content and AI-driven broadcast studios. But beneath the lacquered podium, hidden from any lens, her thumb worried the yellow post-it Julian had pressed into her palm an hour earlier. Stay on script. No Q&A about Meridian. Julian followed his wife on stage at 35:45, tie knotted with surgical precision, confidence lacquered over the bruise of last week's Meridian ambush. He welcomed partners, cited future synergies, data distribution, experiential storytelling, ad tech pipelines, while a 120-inch screen behind him looped a glossy promo reel. The building's lobby hosted a miniature shareholders' reception, engraved name badges, stemless flutes, a quartet playing lo-fi remixes of Beethoven. Board members had flown in from New York, Dallas, Dubai, expecting a coronation. Their faith steadied Julian's pulse, but only barely. He planned to dazzle them, sign the final site lease on camera, and bury rumors that Halstead momentum had stalled. Hidden inside the control booth upstairs, Celeste adjusted her earpiece. She wore a headset stagehands used the badge of a nondescript event producer. No one gave her a second glance. In a world obsessed with faces, she'd embraced the power of angles, show the wrong cheekbone clip, the hair different, and you become part of the scenery. The internal Wi-Fi recognized her alias, credentials A. Chen, granting her admin privileges over the presentation server. She watched the countdown ticker blip toward 36:20, the moment coded into the deck's metadata as lease signing ceremony trigger slide. Her cursor hovered above a concealed deck layer named Echo. The second it reached 37:00, she'd click. Downstairs, Serafina shifted into investor-friendly metrics, projected EBITDA subscriber growth curves, proprietary machine learning moderation. The screen mirrored each talking point pie charts, orbiting like pastel satellites. Analysts typed furiously. The ticker on the news crawl broadcasting live via Halstead's own channel glowed green. Julian's shoulders relaxed. A bearded tech reporter raised his hand, despite the no questions note. Quick clarification, he said. The building deed was recorded only 48 hours ago. Can you confirm ownership is wholly Halstead Magna? Julian flashed a rehearsed grin. The site is secured under a long-term corporate lease with option to purchase paperwork you'll watch us finalize in a minute. Serafina nodded. Transparency is our cornerstone. Applause spattered obligingly. In the booth, Celeste whispered into the mic, stitched into her lapel, camera 3-hold wide. Get the backdrop screens. The AV assistant obeyed, eyes on the multi-view monitor. Celeste's heart didn't race. It stalked a panther measuring distance before pounce. She clicked enter, exactly at 37:01. The promo reel sputtered, frame freezing mid-logo swirl. For half a beat, the silence felt like system lag. Then the LED wall surged white. The speakers hissed, and a single line of black typewriter font materialized 20 feet tall behind Julian's left shoulder. Property deed holder. Celeste Duong. The Second Will Foundation. Gasps detonated. Camera flashes ricocheted like mortar. Some viewers thought it a glitch, but the line didn't vanish. It grew larger, filling the screen until nothing remained but her name and the charitable entity she'd registered 2 nights earlier. Julian's jaw slackened. Serafina's cue card slipped from her fingers, scattering across glossy laminate. Shock rippled through investors. Some lunged for phones, others for wine. Celeste keyed in the second command. The white washed into a slow carousel of PDF pages. County recorder seals, notarized signatures, escrow wire confirmations time-stamped 3 days prior. The visual language was bureaucratic, yet irrefutable. Property transfer. Block 27, Parcel 6. The tower they now occupied, grantee, the Second Will Foundation. Julian spun toward the screen as though staring hard could rewrite pixels. Serafina found her voice, first stepping to the mic, smile pinned on with staples. We, seem to have a technical issue. She gestured at backstage staff. A frantic stage manager waved at the console to cut the feed. Celeste disabled manual override with a keystroke, locking every screen in sync across building floors. Panels in the lobby mirrored the same deed. Elevator TVs. Even the rooftop signage ticker scrolled "Her Second Will" in oily red letters. Reporters smelled blood and surged past velvet ropes. Ms. Halstead, is your lease invalid? Mr. Halstead, did you vet property title before launch? Was this retaliation by Celeste Duong? Questions hammered like hail. Security guards formed a wall, but optics of manhandling the press forced them gentle. The first alert hit trading desks at 3758 unverified claims, cast doubt on Halstead Magna tenancy. Algorithms parsed uncertainty, found no comforting filings in Edgar, and shaved 5% from Halstead Capital's share price within 60 seconds. An associate producer from Bloomberg tweeted a photo of the deed slide. Retweets multiplied like bacteria under heat lamp scandal. By 38:30, financial channels ran Chiron's Halstead debut in turmoil, property rights disputed. Upstairs, Celeste disengaged her headset, handing it to the stunned AV tech. Stage visuals normalized in T-3. She tapped a macro screens, fading to the Halstead logo so no one could claim sabotage lasted longer than spectacle. Yet the deed screenshots had already rocketed across the internet. The retraction served only to confirm authenticity. Back on stage, Julian attempted damage control. We are investigating an administrative oversight, he announced, voice shredding at the edges. Our legal team. His phone buzzed. He glanced, saw a red VIX alert. Halstead cap, 12.4%. Palms began sweating. He looked to Serafina, but she was busy whispering with her publicist. Her father's political PAC donations could stave off regulators, yet no donation mutes shareholder rage. At 39:12, an assistant slipped Julian a folded note incoming call, Governor Halstead. Take now. He froze, knowing cameras still rolled. To accept publicly would look frantic. To ignore could invite war at Thanksgiving. He pocketed it and turned to the crowd with forced poise. I think he said, clearing his throat, we'll adjourn briefly to verify records. Refreshments are available. Laughter tight predatory rose from the press pit. Exiting stage left. Julian found the backstage corridor swarmed by staff with headsets chattering about figure-out system breach, central server, clean external HDMI injection. Someone shoved a Surface tablet at him, county registrar website showing the exact deed copies. She filed it online. We missed the publication notice because we assumed the building was in trust, stammered the in-house counsel. There's no lease enforcement mechanism now they're the landlords. Julian's vision tunneled. Meanwhile, Celeste, still an unremarkable event worker, stepped into a freight elevator and descended to the street. The door clanged shut as security finally realized nobody knew who had run the AV deck override. She walked 2 blocks to an unmarked car where Naomi waited in the driver's seat with takeout banh mi steaming. Celeste buckled in, letting the scent of cilantro and char-grilled pork reset her pulse. Naomi grinned. CNN just labeled it the Foundation Flip Heard Round LA. Celeste allowed herself a small, silent laugh. Not cruel, but crystalline. That's our cue then. Phase resonance proceeds. They drove off, leaving behind the skyscraper flashing between corporate blue and second will crimson, an architectural mood ring broadcasting Julian's panic. Inside the boardroom, converted green room, Julian's father berated the general counsel, spittle-dotting mahogany. Serafina stepped aside, phone pressed to ear. Daddy, we might postpone the live fuse segment. No, it's not a prank. Her voice trembled, first hint of fracture behind curated poise. Investors huddled near laptops, toggling between loss projections and news feeds. A CNBC analyst speculated out loud the building might impose retroactive rent catastrophic for Halstead cash flow. Hashtags Nhar Second Will and Ha Duong Takeover trended globally by 40.05. Stock fell another 8% before trading halted. Emergency limit down protocols triggered, margin calls pinged. A board director whispered, "If this continues, creditors can call the bridge loan." Julian clenched the bridge of his nose. For a moment, he pictured Celeste grading essays under fluorescent dorm lights, laughing at his caffeine jokes, an image simpler than the war room he now occupied. Back then, he'd thought her calm an accessory. Now he understood it as an arsenal. By 40:40, financial journalists camped at the tower's revolving doors, broadcasting live stand-ups about one of the most spectacular corporate embarrassments of the decade. City business permit site crashed under traffic as amateur sleuths searched who else Second Will Foundation owned. A Politico insider tweet claimed Celeste's charity had quietly snapped up several commercial leases implying a pattern. Discord servers of retail traders lit with memes duong with the long game rocket emojis soared. Halstead's crisis PR chief finally corralled Julian and Serafina into a glass conference cubicle. We need a statement disavowing prior knowledge, pledging cooperation. She slid a draft across the table. Serafina scanned it, brush-stroking a tear she pretended was mascara dust. Celeste isn't vindictive, she whispered, surprising Julian with the use of first name. She's surgical. Julian ignored the comment pen hovering. If we sign, he asked, PR, does that prevent legal exposure? It buys goodwill, she replied, but investors will still ask why due diligence failed. He scribbled signature lines anyway, handshaking. Outside the cubicle, the board buzzed about convening a special committee to review leadership. In his peripheral vision, Julian saw Serafina's publicist texting again, likely drafting contingency plans for a separate brand if Halstead stock cratered permanently. The decade of confidence he'd built now felt like eggshell veneer cracking under footfall. At 41:25, a junior analyst burst in, waving her phone. Sir Nasdaq futures on Halstead Media suspended were at -15 after hours globally. Julian's stomach dropped. He'd mortgaged tomorrow on perpetual ascent. Now tomorrow was shorting him. In some distant corner of his mind, he wondered whether Celeste's quiet eyes had glimpsed this moment years ago when she still poured his coffee and asked about vision, not revenue. On the sidewalk, Naomi's Prius slid through a yellow light. Celeste refreshed a feed. One independent bookstore announced pre-orders for CD's debut anthology had quintupled in an hour thanks to viral coverage of the woman who out-strategized an empire. Celeste closed the app, looking out the window at graffiti-laced overpasses, each tag someone's lowercase reclamation. "People love David and Goliath," Naomi said. Celeste shook her head. "They love reminder Goliath can trip on his own armor." She sipped jasmine tea. The car merged onto the 110 skyline, receding behind twilight haze. Back at the skyscraper final, investors vacated. Suit jackets draped over arms like surrendered flags. Some glanced upward, reading the ticker still scrolling second will before the system rebooted to Halstead Blue. They knew which shade history would remember. By 41:59, Julian stood alone amid toppled folding chairs, stage linen untucked contract folder heavy in his hand yet weightless in meaning. Spotlights cooled to amber, casting his silhouette long across the marble, elongated, distorted, empty. Somewhere above him, hidden HVAC vents carried the faint echo of a name he once vowed to cherish. It threaded through ducts, slipped past acoustic panels, and settled at his feet with a chill, "Celeste Duong owns the ground beneath your empire." And for the first time he realized revenge wasn't a fiery meteor. It was the quiet shifting of tectonic plates unnoticed until the skyscraper you celebrate in has already changed its mailing address. The anonymous envelope arrived on the first Thursday after the tower takeover, wedged beneath Celeste's loft door, the way gossip slips under bathroom stalls, uninvited, impatient, impossible to ignore. She discovered it at 4203, just as dawn sluiced gold across the brick floor, turning dust motes into temporary constellations. No postmark, no return address. Only her name in ballpoint ink that trembled at the ascenders, a hand unsteady, either from age or urgency. She paused, mug mid-sip, tasting bergamot and foreboding in equal measure, then knelt to lift the letter as if it were an animal wounded by the journey. Inside, one sheet of lined stationery, creased twice, carrying 7 brutal words penned in cursive from another century. "I was once you, but I stayed quiet." Beneath an address, Oakview Retirement Community, Apt 3C, and nothing else. No signature, no plea, only the marrow-deep resonance of recognition. Celeste stared at the sentence until the serifs blurred. She thought of the countless women who had eaten their own voices because survival demanded silence as daily bread. What if the writer had been forced to swallow her story the way Celeste once swallowed condescension at Halstead dinners? By 4209, the decision was made. Classroom instincts kicked in. Questions begged research narratives, begged context. She tugged on a charcoal cardigan, tucked the letter into her notebook, and left a voicemail for Naomi. "Emergency field trip. Need wheels and plausible deniability." Naomi texted 1 skull emoji and 2 steering wheels. 20 minutes later, a Subaru with construction permits taped to its dash idled outside the loft. Celeste slid into the passenger seat, eyes on the sunrise bruising the skyline. "Oakview," she said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "That the fancy elder place near Pasadena? Fancy enough to bury secrets in manicured hedges?" Celeste answered, fastening her seatbelt like a prelude to combat. The freeway unfurled slick as a ribbon under new rain. Naomi handled the wheel with ironworker calm humming Fleetwood Mac, while Celeste reread the letter, memorizing pressure points of each looped consonant. "You ever think this could be bait?" Naomi asked at 4218. "Everything is bait," Celeste replied. "But sometimes the hook pulls up truth, not teeth." She recalled Grandma warning her that people who accumulate power often amortize their sins across generations, betting no one will audit emotional ledgers decades later. Today felt like audit day. Oakview sat behind wrought iron gates and bougainvillea hedges, trimmed to military precision. A fountain burbled in the courtyard, marble cherubs eternally surprised by their own water. At 4229, Celeste signed the visitor log with the alias Arya Chen. Naomi scribbled assistant beside her name, which made the desk attendant smile with the bland warmth of someone paid to euthanize curiosity. Apartment 3C was on the sunlit side, overlooking tennis courts where retirees lobbed slow orbits of neon green against mortality. Celeste rapped gently. The door cracked, revealing a face folded into elegant wrinkles, hair in a French twist the color of antique silver. The woman's eyes, sharp flint gray, scanned Celeste as though cross-referencing memory. "You came," she whispered, voice ragged velvet. Celeste inclined her head. "You asked." Naomi waited in the corridor, a sentinel in steel-toed boots. Inside, lace curtains filtered morning light over furniture that smelled of cedar and stories unshelved too long. The woman introduced herself as Marion Pierce, once executive assistant to Randall Halstead in the late 1980s. Celeste's spine pricked. She offered tea. Marion declined, fingertips trembling as she unfolded brittle clippings spread across a coffee table, stock certificates, notarized translations, ledger, photocopies, annotated in red pencil. She pointed to one line, "Duong Li An, 132,000 shares, Quill Point Publishing Class B, endorsed 1989. Celeste's blood pounded. Grandma's maiden name, Grandma's lost equity. The certificates were stamped, canceled in ink dark as dried plum. "How did you get these?" Celeste asked at 4237. Marion inhaled, voice threading through guilt. She explained she was once tasked with quiet resolutions, legal housekeeping for the Halsteads' more delicate acquisitions. One resolution involved convincing a Vietnamese novelist, newly widowed, to sign power of attorney over her publishing royalties in exchange for a so-called distribution advance. The paperwork was drafted, misrepresented, and pushed through while the author recuperated from a stroke. That author was Celeste's grandmother. Celeste's fingernails pressed crescent moons into her palm. "You forged her consent." "No," Marion said, eyes shimmering. "I delivered the pen. And I stayed while she trembled, unsure. I told myself it was just business." Tears welled. "Your grandmother trusted me to translate legal idioms. I mistranslated them into silence." Celeste studied the woman, seeing both confession and self-indictment etched in crow's feet. "Why now?" Marion clasped Celeste's hands. "Because you made noise," she said. "I saw your name on the tower screens. I realized silence is an inheritance too, one we pass to younger women and call it wisdom. I won't pass it again." She slid a flash drive across the table, digital scans of memos, internal emails, year-end bonuses tied to risk mitigation. Marion had spent the last 3 decades archiving guilt, waiting for a moment when truth might outweigh fear. Celeste pocketed the drive. "This could bury them," she murmured. "Or bury me," Marian replied, but smiled anyway, relief blooming like a bruise turning golden. At 42:45, Celeste and Naomi exited the apartment silent until they reached the Subaru. Inside, Naomi exhaled a single word: "Receipts." Celeste nodded. "Randall Halstead didn't just strip me of dignity, he strip-mined Grandma's legacy." She tapped the flash drive against her knee. Time to open the vein. Back at the loft by 4307, Celeste convened a war room Zoom with attorney Ramsey and data forensics specialist Dr. May Tran, who moonlit as a cyber librarian for activist journalists. Screens filled with time-stamped PDFs. Ramsey whistled. "These precede statute on certain fraud clauses, no indemnity shield." May decrypted metadata tracing IP addresses to Halstead corporate servers verifying Marian's story. One chain of custody note bore Randall's digital signature alongside board secretary initials. The fraud was not just systemic, it was patriarchally personal. Celeste paced rage tempered by pedagogy anger without lesson is noise, and she needed symphony. "We'll stage simultaneous disclosure," she said, at 4326. One file civil suit on behalf of Grandma's estate seeking restitution, plus punitive damages earmarked for female author scholarships. 2 leak curated docs to investigative journalists specializing in white-collar legacy crime. 3 hold press conference at Victoria Avenue once Athena's scaffolding is draped with student artwork. Symbolism matters. Ramsey chuckled grimly. "Halsteads will file injunctions. Let them." Celeste answered. "Due process is just rope they choose whether to climb or hang." Naomi spun her laptop toward Celeste, showing a mock-up hashtag second verse, a riff on second will. Under it, a timeline infographic tracking Marian's evidence to 1989 accounting disparities. Celeste nodded approval. They scheduled drip releases, each document batch coinciding with media cycles Halstead couldn't control: morning financial shows, midday, podcast drops, evening, prime time exposés. Celeste insisted every file include a footer quoting Grandma's poem translated into English: "We bury seeds in silence. They rise roaring." By 43:59, Celeste drove alone to the county archives, a bunker of microfilm and climate-controlled regret. The clerk retrieved warehouse boxes labeled Duong, Quill Point, 1989 Forgotten, because archivists logged them under foreign author dispute. Celeste donned latex gloves, scanning contracts until her eyes watered. Clause 14C. In perpetuity, grantor relinquishes right to contest. Randall's lawyers had used the same phrase in Julian's divorce petition, linguistic DNA, linking generational exploitation. As she photographed pages, memories of Grandma's last hospital days flooded back the tremor in her hand when she tried to sign a library dedication check, the shame when the pen slipped. Celeste realized the stroke might not have been the sole villain. Stress from legal scam likely accelerated her decline. A quiet grief expanded within her ribcage, like wet cotton, heavy, suffocating absorbent of every unvoiced apology she still owed that gentle titan. Night settled by 44:32. Celeste returned to the loft, lights off city, soundtracking her heartbreak with sirens and muffler static. She opened the old cassette player Grandma once used for dictation, inserted a tape labeled Drafts 1990, pressed play. Static, then Grandma's voice, faint, meticulous reciting lines about phoenix feathers stitched into refugee quilts. The metaphor sliced Celeste open and restitched her with fire thread. Resolve solidified this wasn't solely restitution. It was resurrection. The following morning at 45:07, Celeste visited Oakview again, this time bearing a leather journal wrapped in a silk ribbon. She found Marion on the patio feeding koi in a pond shaped like an ampersand. Celeste placed the journal beside her. "Your story," she said, weighted with my grandmother's blank pages. "Finish it." Marion's eyes glistened. "Do you forgive me?" Celeste considered the horizon where smog brushed mountains mauve. "Forgiveness is a luxury. What I offer is amplification." Marion nodded, tears dropping among koi ripples, quiet circles expanding outward. Back downtown, Ramsey filed the lawsuit at 45:44. Reporters barely had time to digest docket numbers before May's curated leak hit chronicledata.org, the Halstead Appendix: 3 Decades of Quiet Appropriation. Twitter exploded threads comparing the documents to famous literary thefts, TikTok creators dramatizing grandma's signature disappearing under cancellation ink. Bookstagrammers posted side-by-side covers of Quill Point bestsellers, asking how many royalties never reached rightful hands. Within hours, Randall Halstead's PR team released a statement calling the documents contextually incomplete and maliciously timed. But context completed itself when an ex-Quill Point accountant tweeted corroboration, then another former assistant referenced hush agreements. The narrative mutated beyond the reach of boilerplate denial. CNBC Evening Panel invited Celeste to comment. She declined, sending instead a pre-recorded video from the half-renovated auditorium at Victoria Avenue. In the video broadcast at 46:22, Celeste stood beneath scaffolding lit by work lamps, student murals of rising phoenixes half-painted on the wall behind. She wore a simple black blouse, no jewelry, just grandma's fountain pen clipped in the collar. "When I was 19, she began, I learned institutions archive both triumph and theft. Tonight, we unarchive." She detailed the scheme, thanked Marion by first name only, and announced the Duong Pierce restitution grant seeded with funds from the anticipated settlement pledged to women whose intellectual property had been commodified without consent. She ended, "Silence is no longer cost-effective." The clip went viral before local news aired the Halstead rebuttal. #Naj silence is expensive trended global by 46:50. Halstead stock staggered under fresh trading halts, credit default swap spreads widening like fault lines. More brutal, a coalition of authors filed a class action suit citing Celeste's evidence. The publishing world calculated liabilities north of 8 figures. Julian saw the video while pacing the marble of his parents' house. His phone buzzed with bored resignations. In the background, Randall shouted into a satellite call voice, cracking, "Find the leak! Bury it!" Julian realized the leak wasn't a pipe. It was a floodplain reclaimed by centuries-old riverbeds. You can't bury water. Celeste spent the next 48 hours triaging media requests, funneling them to Dr. May's secure server, ensuring victims got narrative priority. She declined Good Morning America, accepted a nonprofit podcast listened to by thousands of immigrant writers. She visited Marion daily, each time bringing drafts of the lawsuit reading clauses aloud, so Marion could hear justice conjugated in present tense. At 47:11, Marion signed an affidavit, hands remarkably steady. "I thought courage belonged to youth," she said. Celeste kissed her knuckles. "Courage belongs to aftermath," she replied. On the third day, an LA Times op-ed headlined, "Invisible Ink: How Patriarchy Erased a Vietnamese Literary Giant." It quoted one of Grandma's untranslated poems about rivers remembering every foot that crossed them. Bookstores set up displays featuring quill point titles written by women with proceeds redirected to the new grant. Celeste redirected anonymous donations to translation scholarships. Naomi installed a timeline mural in Athena's lobby, names of silenced women glowing in ultraviolet under gallery lights. By 48 to 26, the SEC opened inquiry into Halstead Capital's disclosure practices. Cable pundits framed it as yet another reckoning. Randall hired crisis managers, but they couldn't disinfect 30-year paper trails. Shareholder activists demanded his resignation. Behind closed doors, Julian argued for transparency. His father called it betrayal. Irony tasted metallic. The man who'd taught Julian acquisition warfare now suspected his own son of insider leaks. Families fracture like continents. They drift until fault lines become obvious, even to those profiting from denial. Celeste, meanwhile, organized a candlelight reading on Athena's still dusty courtyard. 47 authors stood in a semicircle under scaffolding haloed in work lights. Marian attended in a wheelchair journal on her lap. Each writer read one stanza from Grandma's final unpublished poem lines. Celeste translated that morning. We knit our wounds into lanterns, hang them across night's backbone, so even darkness must read our names. When the last candle guttered, Celeste looked up at the incomplete roof, imagining stars peeking through once construction cleared. She heard Grandma's voice in the rustle of tarps. Good teaching chow lesson never ends, she whispered. Not tonight, Banwai. Tonight we begin syllabus revision. The following dawn, 48 to 59. Celeste drafted a newsletter titled Second Verse Bulletin Number 01. It outlined restitution progress, linked mental health resources for whistleblowers, and invited readers to contribute forgotten stories of creative theft. She scheduled it for 900 a.m., then leaned back, exhaustion and purpose woven tight. Naive to think justice could be linear, but momentum was a classroom revise, reframe, reteach. She closed her laptop at precisely 49, the minute marking 7 hours since the anonymous letter ripped open a scar no Halstead apology could cauterize. She did not feel triumphant. She felt aligned, as if the bones of every muted woman had rotated beneath her skin to point north. The compass read onward. Celeste stood behind the lectern in Athena's half-finished auditorium at 9 on the dot, a single industrial work lamp angled over her shoulder like a miniature sun. Sawdust still perfumed the air. Exposed ductwork gleamed silver overhead. The walls were only half-coated in primer, an intentional choice that made the press feel they'd been ushered into the beating heart of something in motion, unfinished, yet unstoppable. Camera crews ringed the concrete floor, their tripod legs splayed between buckets of joint compound and coils of orange extension cord. If anyone doubted the authenticity of her revolution, the setting erased it. This was the raw skeleton of change, and she intended every beam, every dangling wire to testify. She wore a high-collared cream blouse under a dark blazer with no pinstripes, no jewelry except Grandma's fountain pen clipped like a dagger where a silk pocket square might have fluttered. Naomi stood off to stage right in a neon construction vest, arms folded, eyes scanning exits, while May Tran Ramsey and 3 of the 47 writers occupied the front row, flanked by student volunteers, holding placards painted with single verbs, write, rise, revise. A low hum of anticipation rippled through the room, caught between the hiss of a portable HVAC unit and the intermittent thud of a hammer somewhere on the third floor where contractors were still installing skylight frames. At precisely 49:02, Celeste tapped the mic. The sound echoed a crisp snap that silenced chatter. "Good morning," she began, voice ringing with the authority of a professor who has already graded your argument. "Welcome to the future campus of the Athena Institute, where silence is converted into story and leverage into liberation." A soft murmur rolled across reporters, jostling for vantage. She continued outlining Athena's mission: tuition-free residency, AI-assisted multilingual editing suites, a grant fund seeded by the Duong Pierce restitution suit, and a mandate that every graduate mentor 3 new voices in perpetuity. Slides projected onto a plywood panel behind her depicted the finished building in augmented reality splendor, rooftop gardens, solar ink murals, recording booths, a public library wing, open 24 hours. Each image faded into the next, with no corporate flourish, just the steady rhythm of inevitability. Then she pivoted. "But the birth of Athena," she said, "requires an autopsy of the culture that made her necessary." The lights dimmed. A new slide appeared, an email chain dated 18 months earlier, subject line, "Asset-light content monetization strategy." It showed Julian Serafina and Halstead Counsel discussing Shell LLC's design to funnel political advertising dollars through so-called philanthropy groups, converting tax-deductible donations into covert campaign media buys. Gasps fluttered like doves clipped mid-air. Camera shutters clacked. Celeste's laser pointer skimmed phrases, plausible deniability, Trojan grants narrative shaping. She read one aloud, savoring each syllable. "Embed flagship influencers to engineer consumer conscience." Her tone iced the room. She advanced the slide, wire transfer receipts, linking Halstead Magna Media to offshore nodes in Cyprus and Mauritius, then to super PACs backing fringe candidates aligned with deregulation agendas that would gut arts funding. Another board minutes noting planned acquisition of a minority-owned publisher, not to amplify diverse voices, but to mine demographic data for targeted outrage. The timeline built like a prosecutorial crescendo. Ramsey, leaning against a stack of gypsum boards, watched reporters' eyes widen as they pieced together the mosaic fraud, money laundering, manipulation of electoral sentiment, all sanitized behind phrases like innovative synergy and cross-sector impact. Celeste paused. Her heartbeat pounded, but her voice remained a metronome. The same family that sought to silence a refugee novelist 35 years ago by falsifying contracts, she said, now launders cultural capital into political currency. Today, that ends. She clicked again. The auditorium's side wall, just dry erase paint over sheetrock, flooded with a live feed from the Department of Justice website, statement of investigation, Halstead Capital, and affiliates for suspected violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, Money Laundering Control Act, and Campaign Finance Regulations. The seal glowed like a brand. A collective inhale reverberated. One journalist shouted, "Is this real time?" Celeste nodded once. Phones vibrated en masse push alerts from Reuters' AP local outlets. May's code had triggered the release simultaneously with Celeste's slide. She let the frenzy build, then delivered the final cut, a QR code enlarged behind her that, when scanned, downloaded a searchable database of every contract email and ledger entry tied to Halstead malfeasance, an archive curated for both prosecutors and the public. Transparency, she concluded, is now crowdsourced. Questions erupted, but she lifted her palm. One more thing. The house lights dimmed further. A spotlight found 3 young women at stage left, Layla Brune, Indira Malik, and Gabriela Torres. Each stepped forward, reciting lines from their forthcoming releases, voices intertwined in English, Arabic, Hindi, Spanish, like chords modulating in the same key. When they finished, Celeste said Athena's first cohort, "Not tokens, but harbingers." Applause thundered reporters, forgetting objectivity for a heartbeat. She ended with a bow of the head, stepped off the dais, and melted into Naomi's orbit. The press scrum surged after her, but volunteers in hard hats blurred the path, embodying gentle fortresses. Within 30 minutes, mainstream channels cut regular programming. Stock tickers hemorrhaged red Halstead Capital. 18%, Magna Media halted for volatility, secondary partners plummeting. The SEC launched parallel inquiries into suspicious derivative positions opened by Halstead insiders days before each political ad blitz. Whistleblower hotlines crashed. Pictures of Randall Halstead's mansion surrounded by federal sedans surfaced on social feeds. Julian watched it unfold from the penthouse study tie, loosened hair uncombed for the first time in public memory. The big screen on the wall displayed a CNBC split-panel Celeste's press conference clip, on loop a scrolling banner about DOJ subpoenas analysts debating criminal exposure. Serafina paced, stilettos clicking like agitated metronomes. Randall barked into a satellite phone. No comment, lawyer up, but his voice cracked on comment, betraying the tremor of empire unseamed. A notification chimed Swiss authorities freezing Halcyon sub-accounts. Another, a junior aide, texting Julian a single word, "sorry," before going dark. Julian's pride calcified into terror. Panic sought scapegoats. Ego found a weapon. He opened a private cloud folder labeled Insurance Cab. Inside manipulated ultrasound images, a hospital intake form doctored to show Celeste's name under a termination procedure time-stamped 7 years prior, a period when she'd actually miscarried alone in a sterile room while he brokered a golf course meeting. The forged paperwork had been prepared months ago by a crisis PR firm on retainer, meant as a nuclear deterrent in case she ever threatened asset division. He had never deployed it, partly because a sliver of conscience twisted whenever he saw her handwriting in the journals she left behind. That sliver snapped now. At 52:44, he forwarded the folder to a gossip site notorious for publishing scandal, before verifying plus blind copied 2 partisan commentators hungry to reframe narratives. The email subject line, exposing the hypocrisy of second will. He appended a message, evidence Celeste terminated pregnancy while married contradicts her empowerment platform. He didn't pause to taste the bile of his own misdirection. Minutes later, the images splashed across social timelines with headlines Athena founder's dark secret. Users retweeted while disclaimers scrolled that the origin was sources close to the Halstead family. Celeste was in a makeshift green room. Really a classroom with desks stacked against drywall fielding follow-up questions from a PBS anchor when Naomi's phone pinged. Naomi glanced, her jaw clenching. She turned the screen so Celeste could see blown-up images of the falsified ultrasound hashtags, #choosy champion. second will hoax trending. Beneath them, a smear graphic claimed Celeste had manipulated miscarriages for sympathy. A coldness moved through Celeste's limbs, familiar as night sweats after her miscarriage. A memory of sterile ceiling tiles, the beep of an unsympathetic monitor, the void where Julian's hand should have been. She steadied her breathing. Naomi swore softly, fingers already tapping code to verify metadata. May pinged JPEG hash mismatch, photos faked. Ramsey's number lit up. Want immediate cease and desist drafted. Celeste stared at the screen until the doctored images blurred into noise. When she spoke, her voice surprised even her calm, resonant teacherly. "Hold the legal," she told Ramsey through the speaker. "We won't dignify forgery in a vacuum." She signaled May to trace the EXIF data. Within minutes, they linked the creation timestamp to a MacBook registered under Halstead Magna Media PR. The server log matched Julian's IP from 30 minutes earlier. May packaged the evidence, attached a succinct thread of proof, and at Celeste's nod, posted it on Athena's official channel's screenshots of metadata, chain of custody tables, a short caption, "Integrity is verifiable. Lies leave fingerprints." She appended the original OBGYN record from the miscarriage date, attending physician diagnosis, redacting only the graphic details, but leaving enough to expose the cruelty of the falsification. Celeste stepped back onto the auditorium stage, reporters still present. Mic still hot. She raised a hand. "A personal note," she said, voice slicing through murmurs. "A story circulating claims I had an abortion during my marriage. The documents are fabricated. My medical record verified moments ago confirms a miscarriage, not a choice, but a tragedy. Sharing the truth is painful yet necessary. I will not let grief be weaponized against my purpose or yours." A hush swept over the audience, not pity but solidarity, the collective intake of oxygen when predators flash teeth and prey decides to roar instead. She continued. "It is predictable that when systems of power can't dispute facts, they attempt character assassination. We answer not with counter-assassination, but proof. To anyone who's ever had to defend a private wound in public, your scars speak languages liars will never learn." Silence hung thick electric before breaking into applause, unprompted, unrestrained. Cameras caught Celeste's eyes glistening. She didn't wipe them. Vulnerability framed in evidence is bulletproof. Social feeds pivoted within an hour. Memes mocked Halstead's desperation, photoshopped Julian as a magician pulling forged ultrasounds from a top hat. Influencers resurfaced Celeste's statement alongside statistics about reproductive grief and medical privacy. The smear boomeranged. Halstead legal counsel issued a brief statement distancing the company from unauthorized materials. Late-night talk show monologues practically wrote themselves. Halstead's can't tell truth from ultrasound or tax code. Meanwhile, federal investigators executed search warrants at Halstead headquarters. Drone footage showed agents wheeling out stacks of file boxes. A suspended stock forced margin lenders to liquidate other Halstead holdings, Cascade selling across their portfolio. Serafina's father withdrew the political PACs pending ad buys, citing compliance uncertainties, a euphemism for radioactive. Fund managers downgraded Halstead debt to junk by 5533. Julian's phone lost signal under avalanche board removal notice, divorce lawyer email from Serafina, message from his mother, simply, "What did you do?" and a final push alert that Second Will Foundation donations topped 7 figures within 4 hours of Celeste's speech. At 5600 precisely, Celeste sat alone on a wooden crate backstage, neon construction tape fluttering above like celebratory streamers. Her stomach knotted, adrenaline finally ebbing, hands cold despite the Californian humidity. She remembered Grandma's words scribbled in the second will's margin, "When they try to bury your truth, plant redwoods." She closed her eyes, inhaled the scent of wet plaster and jasmine tea that Naomi had just placed beside her, and allowed herself one slow exhale, half grief, half gratitude, all momentum. Behind her, the auditorium buzzed with journalists filing stories, but in that breath, she heard only the faint echo of a heartbeat, once lost and now reclaimed, amplified through 1,000 microphones no longer out of reach. Celeste pushed through the warped metal door at the end of the North Hall, the one the contractors hadn't touched yet because it required a special hinge nobody could find in catalogs anymore. The knob squealed and then surrendered, revealing the old janitorial storeroom she and Grandma once stole on Sundays to hide from the heaviness of the city. When she stepped inside, a hush swallowed the clamor of nail guns and grinders out in the main wing. Dust drifted in lazy galaxies across her flashlight beam. Stacked chairs formed crooked obelisks. A busted mimeograph crouched in the corner like a relic from some extinct religion of worksheets and carbon fumes. The concrete floor, gritty under her sneakers, bore the memory of chalk hearts she'd scrawled at 15 and later scrubbed off in embarrassment. She felt around for the pull chain overhead, no power yet, but instead found a half-burned taper candle stuck to a brick with melted wax. She lit it with a contractor's lighter she'd pocketed for no reason earlier, and the flame blossomed small but stubborn, tinting everything honey and sepia. The moment the wick caught her knees betrayed her. She sank onto an overturned milk crate, elbows sliding off resolve. The fight with the fake ultrasound had ended only hours ago, victory sharp as shattered glass, yet the price kept revealing hidden decimals. Images of those doctored sonograms pixelated grief stitched into a weapon looped behind her eyelids until tears swelled past their dams. She buried her face in her hands and let sound happen, not genteel sobs, but the primordial keening she denied herself the afternoon she lost the pregnancy. That day, the hospital curtains were the color of diluted toothpaste. Antiseptic breath stung her nostrils, while fluorescent ballast buzzed overhead like 1,000 indifferent insects. Julian had texted he was caught giving a toast and never made it before visiting hours closed. She remembered clutching the call button cord, wanting to swing it like a lasso and drag him through the door by his Savile Row lapels. Instead, she signed the discharge papers alone, bleeding into a pad the size of a mattress, and took a rideshare back to the apartment where the neighbors were grilling carne asada on their balcony, laughter rising through the night. The smell turned her stomach. Her body still insisted it was pregnant even after the sonographer whispered no heartbeat. She'd closed every window, crawled into the bathtub fully clothed, and listened to the upstairs couple thump furniture while making a joy she had just lost. That memory slammed her now like the aftershock nobody warns you about, the grief that waits for quiet corridors and unfinished drywall. Her breath hiccuped down to ragged threads. The candle guttered but held. She realized her fists were balled so tight her nails carved crescents into her palms, mirroring the crescents of the womb that had once curled around potential. She forced her fingers open, inhaled the dust-flecked air, and reached for the duffel she'd set in the corner before the press conference. Inside lay Grandma's unfinished manuscript, the one titled by a sticky note only, Nung Ngui Viet Trung Bong Toi, those who write in the dark. She slid the pages out brittle dot matrix sheets in Vietnamese, interleaved with English translations Celeste herself had begun years earlier, but abandoned for lesson plans and laundry. Edges crumbled under thumb pressure as though time itself were chewing the story she'd promised to protect. She ran the pad of her index finger over Grandma's typewriter ribbon marks, uneven, sometimes faint, where the keys hadn't struck firmly tiny Morse codes of shyness and defiance. She set the candle on a paint bucket, cleared a space on the floor, and arranged the pages like petals. Words leapt at her silenced tongues, tasting salt of survival, lamps of paper lighting slums, the ache of a pen outracing hunger. She heard Grandma's voice hoarse from decades of chalk dust, but lyrical reading these lines to her younger self under this very roof, the two of them giggling each time the building's ghostly boiler clanged approval. Celeste had forgotten those Saturdays, huddling among mop buckets, nibbling on condensed milk sandwiches, while drafting the English version line by painstaking line. Back then, she believed translation was mere substitution. Now she knew it demanded rebirth. Her tears slackened to embers. She pressed a palm flat to the concrete grounding in the physics of the moment. If bodies can break, they can also bear weight. She whispered to the pages, translating aloud some lines she'd never gotten to. We who are told to rub our voices raw against stone carry flint in our throats. We strike any silence that dares dress like shelter, and we call the sparks alphabet. The words quivered out of her throat rusty, but they filled the storeroom with vibrations older than insulation. She imagined each consonant defying the fluorescent boredom of hospital corridors, punching holes in the phlegmatic sky under which Julian had lifted a champagne glass instead of her hand. She remembered the party he attended that day, a venture fund mixer in Malibu drone show over the ocean, execs applauding synchronized lights, while she lay on a gurney counting ceiling holes. She'd swiped through Instagram and seen him on a balcony sleeve-rolled scotch-swirling caption reading, "Building Empires." She'd wanted to comment, "I'm losing ours," but the IV drip beeped, and a nurse murmured, "You need rest, sweetie," and she never typed the sentence. The storeroom air felt thickening, almost warm now. She realized she'd spoken the last line of Grandma's draft, a line she'd never read before because it had been on a page stuck to the platen. The night does not ask if the match regrets the burn. It only opens its ribs and says, "Right here." Celeste closed her eyes, inhaled the candle's faint beeswax sweetness, and decided to carry that command forward. She retrieved her phone thumbs still shaky and opened a fresh document titled Aftermath Curriculum. She typed bullet points. Publish Grandma's manuscript bilingually. Launch at Athena's ribbon cutting. Allocate half first edition profits to pregnancy loss counseling scholarships. Create match. Grant microfund for storytellers emerging from medical trauma. Lecture series. Architecture of Grief, Engineering of Voice. She paused after the last bullet, letting her pulse catch up. She was scheduling manifestations like lesson plans again, but this time, each objective glowed with unignorable hunger. She saved the doc, sent copies to Naomi and May with terse subject line night curriculum. Review after inspections, then clicked the phone dark. Only the candle flickered. Outside the storeroom wall, she could hear muffled laughter, volunteers painting the corridor, joking about who'd spilled primrose on their boots. Life trudged on, messy and unapologetic. A metallic clatter somewhere down the hall startled her. She listened, steadied, then began carefully stacking the manuscript pages back together. Halfway through, she found a slip of paper she'd never seen a dedication Grandma must have typed last taped to the final folio. In English, it read, "For my granddaughter Celeste, when the world says hush, tell it your story is still loading." A tremor rattled her again, but this time the tears were twin streams of relief and ignition. She folded the note, slipped it into her jacket pocket over her heart, and stood. She blew out the candle, pocketed the stub, shoved the manuscript into the duffel, and pushed the door open. The corridor lights had been wired in during press chaos. They blinked awake above her head, flooding the hall with industrial brilliance. The paint spill from volunteers shimmered like a sunrise. Celeste wiped her cheeks with her sleeve white primer streaking the fabric and let the fluorescent hum remind her that electricity is just potential harnessed, that grief is the same. She made her way toward the main atrium where the writers were rehearsing public readings. With each step, the ache didn't vanish, but it found rhythm. Near the atrium doorway, Naomi intercepted her face drawn with worry. "You good," Celeste thought about lying, but shook her head no. Naomi opened her arms. Celeste leaned into the embrace for 3 long breaths, smelling sweat sawdust and the faint citrus soap Naomi favored. She whispered, "I need 30 minutes. Then let's scan this manuscript before the edges crumble totally." Naomi rubbed her back once. 30 then. She stepped aside. Celeste cut through scaffolding shadows, passing Indira and Layla, debating comma placement, past Gabriella, recording pronunciation guides for an audiobook version of her novella. The writers paused to smile at her silent conspirators in the project of reclaiming air. She reached the freight elevator shaft, now repurposed as temporary archive scanning lab. May waited by a flatbed scanner, neon sticky notes organized like a war map. Without words, Celeste handed over the folio. May's eyes widened at the weight of history, but she simply nodded and powered the device. As the scanner light glided under the first sheet, Celeste sat on another overturned paint bucket, watching pixels bloom into permanence on the monitor. The hum of the machine sounded eerily like a fetal heartbeat monitor, steady pulse of translation translating again. It didn't hurt this time. It echoed with new appetite. She pulled Grandma's dedication from her pocket, smoothed its fold lines, and taped it to the scanner's rim where every operator would see. When the last page fed through timestamp reading 6247 May, saved the PDF to 3 redundant drives, cloud-mirrored to servers on 2 continents. "Now," she said softly, "no one can cancel these signatures." Celeste smiled small but fierce. She checked her watch 62:51. 9 minutes until her next strategy huddle with civil rights attorneys prepping for tomorrow's deposition. She inhaled the smell of warm circuitry paper and fresh beginnings. "Night does not ask," she murmured, echoing the line, "so we write." At 62:59 she rose, wiped a final tear that had dried to salt, and stepped back into the hive of Athena cables, snaking voices, layering paint, drying like sunrise on every wall. The storeroom's silence had given her a truth she could carry. The hallway's clamor now gave her the momentum to wield it. The second hand ticked to 63 years. She squared her shoulders, imagined Grandma's hand pressed gentle and proud between her shoulder blades, and walked toward the noise, ready to hammer language into scaffolding until the roof sang. Celeste awoke on the office couch at 6:31 a.m. to the sub-bass purr of Athena's freshly installed backup generators, the ones students had nicknamed The Thunder Twins. The loft lights in downtown were still out from the rolling blackout, but Victoria Avenue thrummed with purpose. Inside the half-finished Institute, coffee urns hissed like steam locomotives, while 20 early rising volunteers threaded Ethernet through ceiling beams. Within minutes, she was upright hair in a hurried braid, sliding her laptop from under a stack of grant applications. May had spent the night indexing every line of evidence, forged ledgers, falsified shell invoices, Grandma's original wills, and the notarized rescission documents Marion had uncovered. At 0645, a secure tunnel opened to a Department of Justice drop box. Celeste dragged the folder 3 gigabytes of generational theft into the window, clicked upload, and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen like dawn across concrete. 5 minutes later, she repeated the ritual with a consortium of media partners. ProPublica, The Guardian's investigative desk, a Japanese public access station known for fearless long-form, and 3 independent podcasts specializing in whistleblower protection. Each received the same archive plus a cryptographic checksum and a short embargo note. Publish noon EST truth deserves synchronized loudness. When the final server showed 100%, she powered the lid shut, palms trembling, not with fear, but with voltage. The world now possessed every receipt. By 7:15, the federal subpoenas began to ping phones across Los Angeles like FEMA alerts. Randall Halstead was intercepted leaving his gated driveway. Serafina answered the door of her minimalist penthouse, only to find 2 IRS agents with clipboards longer than her vision board. Julian, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled suit, was dragged from his Tesla outside a boutique gym where he'd sought cameras for a preemptive statement. News choppers caught the moment handcuffs glinted at his wrists. The anchor gasped when he shouted, "I'm the victim," as though punctuation might magic outrage into innocence. Halstead's stock, already hemorrhaging, cratered so hard, the exchange suspended trading for the remainder of the session. Hedge funds that once toasted Julian's audacity scrambled for lifeboats that didn't exist. His mother Lorraine skipped bail before it even formalized hopping a private jet to Nassau by 8 o'clock, with 3 suitcases of bearer bonds and enough jewels to bankrupt a small principality. Customs flagged the tail number too late. By the time marshals reached the tarmac, her plane was a silver hyphen slicing the horizon. Reporters called it an admission of guilt in real time. Pundits labeled it the Lazarus tax evasion maneuver. Inside, Athena Celeste stood atop unfinished bleachers, addressing the first cohort of 47 writers. Many clutched hard hats over pajamas. A few held still steaming bowls of instant pho. Today, she said, voice still graveled by sleep, but amplified by conviction, the Institute transitions from blueprint to collective. She announced the formation of the Athena Council, a student-led governing body with rotational veto power even over her. Gasps rippled. Someone asked if she was sure. Power that can't be surrendered was never empowerment, she replied. Naomi wheeled in a dolly stacked with archival boxes, financial keys, trademark certificates, title deeds. Celeste lifted one document high, the master charter transferring 71% of the foundation's voting shares to the council effective immediately. She felt something loosen inside her ribcage, as if an invisible corset of responsibility had finally unlatched. Applause, hesitant at first, rose until the walls quivered. The echo lodged under the rafters like migrating birds discovering permanent sky. At 09:02, her phone vibrated with a DOJ confirmation agents had matched the submitted data to seized Halstead servers. Charges now included wire fraud conspiracy and violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. A separate message from ProPublica simply read, "We go live in 30, followed by a fire emoji constellation. Celeste exhaled, walked to the west window where scaffolding framed a slice of downtown, and allowed herself 60 full seconds to do nothing. No strategizing, no what-if arithmetic, just listening to rain gutters gargle last night's storm. For that minute, she felt weightless, as though Grandma's ghost had swapped bone for helium, and when the second hand hit the mark, she was ready again. Noon struck like a gong. Simultaneous push notifications from every partner outlet cascaded through phones worldwide. The second will files how an American dynasty monetized literary voices and manipulated democracy. The article packages were interactive, zoomable flowcharts, audio explainers, the original Vietnamese pages of Grandma's manuscript. Social media ignited. Second, Will thundered back to the summit of trending lists eclipsing celebrity gossip and even a minor earthquake that rattled Santa Barbara minutes earlier. Academics union organizers and startup founders retweeted the charts as cautionary parables. Congregations of teachers read the exposé aloud in faculty lounges. College students printed the resignation emails of Halstead board members onto sticker paper and plastered them over campus ad kiosks. At 12:37, federal agents frog-marched Julian through the courthouse parking lot, while cable hosts dissected every frame: his loosened tie, the storm cloud stubble, the defensive tilt of his jaw. Prosecutors slapped a sealed indictment on his chest thicker than a Tolstoy novel. When asked for comment, he muttered, "You're all playing her script," confirming to millions that he'd finally recognized the architecture of his downfall. Cameras cut to Celeste in a Zoom feed from Athena's library, bare plywood shelving, lined with donated books, where she simply said, "Justice is collaborative storytelling," then signed off before anyone could mine her for sound bites. The restraint made anchors gush authenticity as negative space. By mid-afternoon, the State Department issued a bulletin for Lorraine Halstead's extradition. Bahamian officials, sensing leverage, froze her accounts and hinted at cooperation pending goodwill loans for hurricane relief. Halstead Magnum Media filed Chapter 11 by 1505. Creditors installed interim trustees who immediately laid off the executive tier. Employees flooded LinkedIn with "I was blind, but now I see" manifestos. The governor's re-election campaign scrubbed all photos featuring Serafina's engagement. Her Instagram switched to private within hours. None of it surprised Celeste. What surprised her was how unmoved she felt watching the dominoes. Schadenfreude required energy better spent elsewhere. At 16:22, she convened the inaugural council meeting in a classroom smelling of joint compound and fresh resolve. Each student rep received a laser-cut wooden token engraved with Athena's crest, a stylized owl clutching a pen rather than a spear. They debated the first order of business: should the foundation accept new donations in light of the media frenzy? A sophomore from Nairobi argued yes, but only through a transparent blockchain ledger open to public audit. A retired librarian auditing classes proposed a Creative Commons licensing arm for alumni work. Celeste took no part unless asked content to watch power braid itself. By the time dusk siphoned light through tarp-covered windows, The council had ratified a charter amendment capping executive salaries, including Celeste's, to the median writer stipend. She signed it with quiet pride, remembering Grandma's admonition, "Let legacy be a relay, not a throne." Night settled violet across the city. Floodlights bathed Athena's facade, now unfurled with a massive banner painted by students' authority belongs to the author. News vans still idled out front, but the story angle had shifted. They focused on the renovated classrooms, the AI translation pods humming on generator power, the writers laughing on scaffolds, roller brushes dripping neon onto canvases stretched where drywall waited. At 2010, a reporter asked Celeste if she considered herself finished. She smiled, eyes tired yet unbroken. "A teacher's work is recursive," she said. "We grade, we learn, we grade again." When the cameras finally withdrew, the building exhaled a deep, timber-scented sigh. Celeste climbed to the rooftop garden still under construction. Planters brimmed with dirt, but no blooms yet. She planted her boots in one, scooped a fistful of soil, and let it trickle through her fingers, thinking how seeds look like stones until time says otherwise. Her phone buzzed, a text from Naomi downstairs, power grid stable. "You okay?" Celeste typed back. "Yes. Planting season." She slipped the phone away and stared at the skyline where the Halstead Towers lights were dark foreclosure tape rumored to be going up tomorrow. Somewhere beyond that silhouette, Julian sat in a federal cell learning the acoustics of consequence. His empire returned to soil he'd tried to pave. The moon rose slender as a pen nib, etching light across rooftops. Celeste imagined Grandma standing beside her, arms folded, satisfied but mischievous. "We did it," she whispered into the wind. A voice in her memory replied, "We started it." Behind her, the institute flickered as students rigged fairy lights along the railings, laughter threading with generator hum, pages of new manuscripts rustling like sails catching midnight breeze. Celeste brushed dirt from her palms, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and headed back to the stairwell. The house she'd built no longer required her shadow at every threshold. It pulsed with many silhouettes, each determined never to auction off their voice. Below, the newly minted council drafted tomorrow's agenda: a symposium on ethical AI credits, a vote on free childcare for resident authors, a memorial reading for voices lost to censorship. Celeste paused on the landing, listening to their animated debate. The building itself seemed to lean closer, as if the brick were thrilled to hold noise after decades of forced hush. She smiled, descended the final steps, and pushed through the door into a hallway blazing with purposeful chaos. The future finally sounded exactly like community. Celeste awoke on the office couch at 6:31 a.m. to the sub-bass purr of Athena's freshly installed backup generators, the ones students had nicknamed the Thunder Twins. The loft lights in downtown were still out from the rolling blackout, but Victoria Avenue thrummed with purpose. Inside, the half-finished institute coffee urns hissed like steam locomotives, while 20 early-rising volunteers threaded Ethernet through ceiling beams. Within minutes, she was upright hair in a hurried braid, sliding her laptop from under a stack of grant applications. May had spent the night indexing every line of evidence: forged ledgers, falsified shell invoices, Grandma's original wills, and the notarized rescission documents Marion had uncovered. At 06:45, a secure tunnel opened to a Department of Justice drop box. Celeste dragged the folder 3 gigabytes of generational theft into the window, clicked "Upload," and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen like dawn across concrete. 5 minutes later, she repeated the ritual with a consortium of media partners. ProPublica, The Guardian's investigative desk, a Japanese public access station known for fearless long-form, and 3 independent podcasts specializing in whistleblower protection. Each received the same archive, plus a cryptographic checksum and a short embargo note. Publish noon EST truth deserves synchronized loudness. When the final server showed 100%, she powered the lid shut, palms trembling not with fear, but with voltage. The world now possessed every receipt. By 7:15, the federal subpoenas began to ping phones across Los Angeles like FEMA alerts. Randall Halstead was intercepted leaving his gated driveway. Serafina answered the door of her minimalist penthouse only to find 2 IRS agents with clipboards longer than her vision board. Julian, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled suit, was dragged from his Tesla outside a boutique gym where he'd sought cameras for a preemptive statement. News choppers caught the moment handcuffs glinted at his wrists. The anchor gasped when he shouted, "I'm the victim," as though punctuation might magic outrage into innocence. Halstead's stock, already hemorrhaging, cratered so hard the exchange suspended trading for the remainder of the session. Hedge funds that once toasted Julian's audacity scrambled for lifeboats that didn't exist. His mother, Lorraine, skipped bail before it even formalized hopping a private jet to Nassau by 8 o'clock, with 3 suitcases of bearer bonds and enough jewels to bankrupt a small principality. Customs flagged the tail number too late. By the time marshals reached the tarmac, her plane was a silver hyphen slicing the horizon. Reporters called it an admission of guilt in real time. Pundits labeled it the Lazarus tax evasion maneuver. Inside, Athena Celeste stood atop unfinished bleachers addressing the first cohort of 47 writers. Many clutched hard hats over pajamas. A few held still steaming bowls of instant pho. Today, she said, voice still graveled by sleep, but amplified by conviction, the Institute transitions from blueprint to collective. She announced the formation of the Athena Council, a student-led governing body with rotational veto power even over her. Gasps rippled. Someone asked if she was sure. Power that can't be surrendered was never empowerment, she replied. Naomi wheeled in a dolly stacked with archival boxes, financial keys, trademark certificates, title deeds. Celeste lifted one document high, the master charter transferring 71% of the foundation's voting shares to the council, effective immediately. She felt something loosen inside her rib cage, as if an invisible corset of responsibility had finally unlatched. Applause, hesitant at first, rose until the walls quivered. The echo lodged under the rafters like migrating birds discovering permanent sky. At 09:02, her phone vibrated with a DOJ confirmation. Agents had matched the submitted data to seized Halstead servers. Charges now included wire fraud conspiracy and violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. A separate message from ProPublica simply read, "We go live in 30, followed by a fire emoji constellation." Celeste exhaled, walked to the west window where scaffolding framed a slice of downtown, and allowed herself 60 full seconds to do nothing. No strategizing, no what-if arithmetic, just listening to rain gutters gargle last night's storm. For that minute, she felt weightless, as though Grandma's ghost had swapped bone for helium, and when the second hand hit the mark, she was ready again. Noon struck like a gong. Simultaneous push notifications from every partner outlet cascaded through phones worldwide. The second will files how an American dynasty monetized literary voices and manipulated democracy. The article packages were interactive zoomable flowcharts, audio explainers, the original Vietnamese pages of Grandma's manuscript. Social media ignited. Hashtag second will thundered back to the summit of trending lists, eclipsing celebrity gossip, and even a minor earthquake that rattled Santa Barbara minutes earlier. Academics union organizers and startup founders retweeted the charts as cautionary parables. Congregations of teachers read the exposé aloud in faculty lounges. College students printed the resignation emails of Halstead board members onto sticker paper and plastered them over campus ad kiosks. At 12:37, federal agents frog-marched Julian through the courthouse parking lot, while cable hosts dissected every frame: his loosened tie, the storm cloud stubble, the defensive tilt of his jaw. Prosecutors slapped a sealed indictment on his chest, thicker than a Tolstoy novel. When asked for comment, he muttered, "You're all playing her script," confirming to millions that he'd finally recognized the architecture of his downfall. Cameras cut to Celeste in a Zoom feed from Athena's library, bare plywood shelving lined with donated books, where she simply said, "Justice is collaborative storytelling," then signed off before anyone could mine her for sound bites. The restraint made anchors gush authenticity as negative space. By mid-afternoon, the State Department issued a bulletin for Lorraine Halstead's extradition. Bahamian officials, sensing leverage, froze her accounts and hinted at cooperation pending goodwill loans for hurricane relief. Halstead Magna Media filed Chapter 11 by 1505. Creditors installed interim trustees who immediately laid off the executive tier. Employees flooded LinkedIn with "I was blind, but now I see" manifestos. The governor's re-election campaign scrubbed all photos featuring Serafina's engagement. Her Instagram switched to private within hours. None of it surprised Celeste. What surprised her was how unmoved she felt watching the dominoes. Schadenfreude required energy better spent elsewhere. At 16:22, she convened the inaugural council meeting in a classroom smelling of joint compound and fresh resolve. Each student rep received a laser-cut wooden token engraved with Athena's crest, a stylized owl clutching a pen rather than a spear. They debated the first order of business should the foundation accept new donations in light of the media frenzy. A sophomore from Nairobi argued yes, but only through a transparent blockchain ledger open to public audit. A retired librarian auditing classes proposed a Creative Commons licensing arm for alumni work. Celeste took no part unless asked content to watch power braid itself. By the time dusk siphoned light through tarp-covered windows, the council had ratified a charter amendment capping executive salaries, including Celeste's, to the median writer stipend. She signed it with quiet pride, remembering Grandma's admonition, "Let legacy be a relay, not a throne." Night settled violet across the city. Floodlights bathed Athena's facade, now unfurled with a massive banner painted by students, "Authority belongs to the author." News vans still idled out front, but the story angle had shifted. They focused on the renovated classrooms, the AI translation pods humming on generator power, the writers laughing on scaffolds, roller brushes dripping neon onto canvases stretched where drywall waited. At 2010, a reporter asked Celeste if she considered herself finished. She smiled, eyes tired yet unbroken. "A teacher's work is recursive," she said. "We grade, we learn, we grade again." When the cameras finally withdrew, the building exhaled a deep, timber-scented sigh. Celeste climbed to the rooftop garden still under construction. Planters brimmed with dirt, but no blooms yet. She planted her boots in one, scooped a fistful of soil, and let it trickle through her fingers, thinking how seeds look like stones until time says otherwise. Her phone buzzed a text from Naomi downstairs, power grid stable. "You okay, Celeste?" typed back. "Yes, planting season." She slipped the phone away and stared at the skyline where the Halstead Towers lights were dark foreclosure tape rumored to be going up tomorrow. Somewhere beyond that silhouette, Julian sat in a federal cell learning the acoustics of consequence his empire returned to soil he'd tried to pave. The moon rose slender as a pen nib, etching light across rooftops. Celeste imagined Grandma standing beside her, arms folded, satisfied but mischievous. "We did it," she whispered into the wind. A voice in her memory replied, "We started it." Behind her, the institute flickered as students rigged fairy lights along the railings, laughter threading with generator hum, pages of new manuscripts rustling like sails catching midnight breeze. Celeste brushed dirt from her palms, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and headed back to the stairwell. The house she'd built no longer required her shadow at every threshold. It pulsed with many silhouettes, each determined never to auction off their voice. Below, the newly minted council drafted tomorrow's agenda: a symposium on ethical AI credits, a vote on free childcare for resident authors, a memorial reading for voices lost to censorship. Celeste paused on the landing, listening to their animated debate. The building itself seemed to lean closer, as if the brick were thrilled to hold noise after decades of forced hush. She smiled, descended the final steps, and pushed through the door into a hallway blazing with purposeful chaos. The future finally sounded exactly like community. Celeste left the city the way mist lifts from river stones, without argument, without apology, releasing shape in increments until even her absence felt gentle. 5 days after federal marshals sealed the Halstead penthouse, and 47 days before Athena's official grand opening, she handed Naomi a padded envelope containing power of attorney papers, a duplicate hard drive of the second will files, and a letter addressed simply, "Counsel." Her only spoken instruction, caught by the security camera in the Institute's lobby, later archived like a relic, was steer by horizons, not harbors. At dawn, she wheeled a battered carry-on past the loading dock, left her Prius keys on the front seat with half a tank, and walked to Union Station. She bought a one-way Amtrak ticket south along the coast, chose the last car, and watched Los Angeles subdivide into smaller and smaller betrayals until nothing recognizable remained but coastline and sky. Somewhere near San Juan Capistrano, she penned a line on hotel stationery, "Not leaving to avenge, only to remind them I lived." She folded the slip twice, sealed it with a thumbnail crease, and mailed it from the next platform kiosk. By the time Naomi found it taped to Athena's oak front doors, Celeste's train was a vanishing filament between ocean and horizon. Months unspooled, headlines mutated from criminal indictments to congressional hearings, from foreclosure auctions to a cottage industry podcast called the Halstead Habitué. Commentators coined Duong Doctrine for legislation mandating royalty transparency across creative industries. Inside Athena drywall gave way to murals, extension cords to buried conduit scaffolding to sunlit mezzanines hung with hammocks where fellows drafted stories in midair. The Student Council instituted collective childcare, a stipend funded by the restitution settlement Julian's estate could not dodge. Young mothers wrote while toddlers stacked blocks in the next room, a symphony of vowels and giggles. Celeste's name lingered on plaques and letterheads, but not in daily conversation. Like oxygen, her presence was now infrastructure felt not flaunted. Occasional postcards arrived from places recognizable only by postmarks. Juneau, Oaxaca, Reykjavik, each bearing a single haiku or half-sketched coastline, never a return address. The council pinned them to a corkboard labeled Compass Fragments. 1 year to the day after Celeste stroked her thumb across a train window and watched city light tangle with salt spray. Julian stood before a federal judge in a walnut-paneled courtroom whose air conditioning hummed like a giant bored locust. The docket number was longer than his remaining net worth. Reporters noted the irony that his cufflinks, once platinum, were now cheap replicas, the originals seized as assets. He tried to read a statement blaming overzealous subordinates, but his throat deserted him. The judge's gavel punctuated sentencing like a period at the end of a myth. 28 months in federal prison plus restitution, so steep his counsel looked hyperventilating. Outside protesters held up cardboard owls and paperbacks. One sign read, "Can't spin silence into gold if we record the boom." When marshals led him down the courthouse steps, a gust of spring wind flipped his collar and scattered the prepared press packets like albino moths. No one bothered to chase them. Far away in a clapboard cottage rented month to month on a cliffside draped in wild nasturtiums, Celeste's laptop pinged with a scheduled alert she'd almost forgotten. She was barefoot, hassling a mocha pot into begrudging espresso when the screen flashed NYT Bestsellers hardcover fiction #1, the ones they couldn't silence by CD. She set the mocha aside, the coffee sputtering its own applause, and clicked the link. The review page quoted a line she had written in the storeroom beside Grandma's candle. "We buried seeds in silence. They rose roaring." Critics called the novel part literary arson, part neonatal universe. She closed the browser before finishing the blurb. Outside, pelicans traced parabolic arguments against the turquoise Pacific. Each wing beat felt like confirmation that breath could travel farther than the lungs that birthed it. She did not toast the news. Instead, she sipped cooling espresso and whispered, "Grandma, they read you letting the words drift out the unscreened window so gulls might carry them seaward." Back in Los Angeles, the Athena courtyard glowed with festival lanterns as faculty, students, and neighborhood families gathered for a sentencing day vigil rebranded as Phoenix Night. Food trucks lined the curb handing out banh mi and vegan pupusas. A pop-up stage hosted poetry in 4 languages. Projector drones stitched lines of Grandma's novel against the Institute's west facade. At 8:17 p.m., Naomi took the mic, voice trembling only once when she referenced the woman who taught us to build doors where walls once performed as destiny. She held up the newest CD novel embossed in copper foil and announced every public school library in the county would receive a copy free shipping funded by Halstead Restitution Interest. Children cheered, though they didn't yet know the algebra of that irony. The council unveiled a sculpture at the courtyard's heart, an open book forged from recycled rebar, its pages feathered into wings. Beneath a bronze plaque bore Celeste's departure words, "Not for revenge, to remind you I was here." Season's reed whistled through the Institute's eaves. Santa Ana winds, combing autumn marine layers, rinsing winter jacaranda petals confettied across spring. By late summer, the library's glass roof retracted on clear nights, and students dozed on beanbags beneath constellations, while AI read lullaby chapters in 9 dialects. Application numbers tripled, then quintupled. Donors tried to shove millions through cracks Celeste's bylaws wouldn't allow, so the council redirected surplus into satellite programs at community colleges. Legislators toured posing for social media in front of owl murals. They left behind promises and selfies, but couldn't insert reins into a structure wired for decentralization. Journalists still asked where Celeste had vanished. Students answered with shrugs or mythic rumors, teaching on a cargo ship, ghostwriting treaties, cultivating kelp. The uncertainty became part of the campus mythos, like gravity you learn to trust without seeing the mathematician's chalkboard. On the anniversary's dusk, a camera crew from a public access documentary set up in the newly landscaped garden behind the main wing, waiting to capture B-roll of students reading under the massive California sycamore transplanted from a condemned freeway median. Golden hour lacquered every leaf. A freshman named Rhea, first in her family to attend any kind of institute, settled, cross-legged on the carved limestone bench, unaware of the lens zooming slowly toward her. She opened the ones they couldn't silence to page 93, where a character modeled after Grandma scribbles edits in pencil margins. Voice is not a gift. It's a muscle. Exercise it or atrophy. Rhea mouthed the sentence, ran her fingers over the indentation, and smiled with the private awe of someone who just discovered the world has trapdoors leading upward. Behind her, half hidden by cascading bougainvillea, stood the final element of Athena's architectural epilogue, a cedar sign no taller than a 7th grader. Visitors often missed it amid louder artworks, but the director of the documentary scanning for framing spotted the wood catching last light and motioned the cameraman to dolly back, widening the shot. As the rig receded, Rhea remained in profile, absorbed her hair a constellation of sunlight, her shadow blending with bark. The dolly wheels whispered over gravel, revealing more of the courtyard writers pacing with earbuds, toddlers, chalk-drawing galaxies, an elder alum fixing wind chimes to a pergola. Another meter back, and the cedar plaque sharpened into legibility for the women who were never asked to speak. The camera steadied. Cicadas revved their summer engines. In the distant street, a bus exhaled hydraulic sighs. Inside the atrium, someone practiced a monologue in Yoruba. Rhea turned a page, sunlight sliding down her cheekbone like an editorial line break. The director whispered, "Hold. That's our ending." 10 silent seconds passed, the kind that stretch like fresh taffy, sweet and tensile. The frame captured leaf flickers, the gentle rise of Rhea's shoulders, as she breathed story into lungs that had hours earlier debated the physics of metaphor. Then the dolly inched one final centimeter back, locking the plaque's words center bottom, anchoring the image as both dedication and invitation. In her cliffside rental, Celeste brewed chamomile, unaware a documentary lens had just penned her coda. She sat on the porch where nasturtium vines licked salt wind, opened a leather notebook, and wrote only one line before closing the cover. Every ending is rehearsal for resonance. She smiled, not at the phrase, but at the certainty someone else would revise it, strengthen its tendon, carry it someplace she could not. She lifted the cup to her lips, tasted warmth laced with sea and let dusk wrap the coast in bruised velvet. Behind her, a stack of rough pages waited new voices mailed from Athena seeking notes. She would read them tomorrow. Tonight, tide and moonlight would suffice, as steady as the truth that had outlived attempted erasure. In Los Angeles, streetlights flickered alive along Victoria Avenue, illuminating the owl wing sculpture now burnished by a year's worth of rain and protest banners. Soft chords from a student's guitar drifted between buildings. The bronze plaque gleamed beneath LED lamps, casting its message onto garden stones like a second, quieter moon. Passers-by paused, read, and sometimes whispered the words aloud, not knowing the line was hammered from the silence of one woman and tempered by the echoes of countless others. Above the night brimmed with possibilities pronounced but not yet carved, sentences still unspooling across tongues, newly brave paragraphs testing flight. The camera's red tally light blinked off, yet the story kept recording frame after invisible frame into a reel no censors would ever own.